This is the Environmental Protection Commission public hearing and regular meeting, Wednesday, March 29, 2023, at the Darien Town Hall. I'd like to point out we have a new court reporter, Bonnie, Karen, the old one, Bonnie, who everybody remembers from decades. Okay, has fully retired, so we welcome Karen on to the stage. The first item of business is a public hearing, EPC 5-2023, 17 Nickerson Lane, M. Ross and K. Ross, to construct a new single-family dwelling, drive, walkways, terraces, water service, sanitary sewer, swimming pool, walls, and other related features in a special flood hazard area, proximate to Holly Pond and the other areas of resource. The property lies along the south side of Nickerson Lane, approximately 800 feet west of Nearwater Lane, and is identified as map numbered 52, lot number 9. The zone is R1, and it is approximately 0.9799 acres. Rick?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. As a matter of housekeeping for the public hearing, this application for the new single-family dwelling on this waterfront property was submitted to the EPC on in advance of the February 1st meeting, and it was posted on the agenda of that meeting for acceptance. It was accepted at the February 1st meeting. In addition, the commission determined to hold a public hearing on the matter based upon a determination that a hearing on the matter would be in the public interest and that the proposed activities may have a significant impact. The applicant was given notice of the acceptance and scheduling of this public hearing on February 7th, and of course it was scheduled for this evening, March 29th, for the hearing itself. Correspondence that was generated by staff comments, staff inspection, and consultation with the commission members at that meeting outline additional information necessary to move forward with the processing of this application and review of the application was transmitted to the applicant, was generated and transmitted to the applicant on February 7th. The notice of the public hearing was published in the Darien Times in accordance with the regulations twice, on the 16th and 23rd. The applicant has paid the public hearing fee. The applicant has also provided notice to abutters within 100 feet of the property of this public hearing, and that was on March 10th, again in accordance with the regulations. The applicant has reacted to the request for information and has submitted additional information on March 14th in accordance with our requirements. The agenda for this public hearing was posted with the town clerk on March 23rd, and the applicant was transmitted a copy of our preliminary staff comments, our agenda summary report for this public hearing on March 28th. In that brief memo, I summarized the plans that are part of the record. We could go through each one. This memo of March 22nd lists all the things that the applicant has provided as part of the record under consideration. Additional items that had been submitted or made a part of the record after the presentation of this memo include a staking plan that was provided by the applicant to assist the commission in its review of the actual field conditions out there. Stakes were actually placed in the field, and a plan showing where they were relative to property boundaries and resources had been submitted. We also have a peer review report for environmental conditions that has been presented, and the applicant has received that as well. That was from ELS on date 3/29. There were comments by the DEP in a report that were made part of, that were submitted and again forwarded to the applicant 3/24. There was a technical report from Joe Canis on engineering elements acting on behalf of the town, and that was dated 3/23. Again, applicant receiving copies of that that report. There was, again, our EPC report in advance of this, the 22nd of March. That was prepared in advance of the meeting. Again, the applicant received a copy of that. And I just wanted to reiterate that attached to that was our additional list of information that was back from February 7th that the applicant had been working with. Other things as part of this file, which is EPC application 05-2023, we have other information that staff has used in the preparation of documents, including a copy of the map of the DEP Natural Diversity Database, the flood insurance rate map that's pertinent to this application, as well as sea level rise and Limwa mapping from the state of Connecticut that again, we use to look at the potential for flooding over the next 20, 30 years or so. I also want to add to the record is my resume that unfortunately extends back about 40 years in this profession as working in communities throughout Fairfield County, including Stratford, Fairfield, Greenwich, and Stamford, the last nearly 38 years in the city of Stamford as analyst or enforcement officer, analyst planner, in the last 12 or 14 years as executive director, running their environmental program, which was associated with 5 different programs, including coastal area management, inland wetlands, and floodplain. I wanted to add that to the record as well. So with that, we have the applicant here this evening. I will be available to answer questions. It is I would think, a challenging lot. It's resource rich. The applicant is doing their best to work with those elements, and they intend to make a presentation. And I think if you follow closely the February 7th letter that was generated by staff and the commission is a pretty good guideline of what we believe are the pertinent issues that need to be addressed as part of the public hearing. And I would just allow the applicant to move forward, and if I can have the opportunity after the presentation, just ask some general questions as well as commission members.
Thanks, Rick. Can you please identify yourself?
Sure. Good evening. For the record, Kurt Lowenstein, licensed professional engineer in the state of Connecticut with Landtech. We're the project engineer, site civil firm. We do have an environmental department as well. We're here tonight representing the homeowner, or one of the homeowners, Mitchell Ross, who is sitting in the center of the front row there. I'm also joined with other members of the design team. From the far end, we have Douglas Vanderhorn from Vanderhorn Architects, Richard Nichols, also from Vanderhorn Architects, and then Brian Carey from my office, who's a professional wetland scientist as well as a licensed arborist. I know the first opening, I did give a brief presentation, but I know it's been a little while, so if you'll indulge me, I'll walk us through the project again. Property is located on Nickerson Lane. It does have frontage along Holly Pond. Holly Pond is a tidally influenced body of water. As such, there is a flood zone associated with that, and we have designed in our proposal, our house is and will be FEMA compliant. The property, if you've been out to the site, is currently vacant. You'll notice as you enter the property, there is an old building pad from when there was a house there many years ago, but it has been developed in the past. And what we're proposing here is a new single-family residence for Mr. Ross and his wife to live. Access will be off of Nickerson Lane as it was previously. We have a driveway in the front that comes by a parking court, garage along the south side of the dwelling. There will be a patio and pool in the back. The house itself, although this isn't a zoning commission, is compliant with all of the town zoning requirements. We are on the coast here, so the requirement for stormwater detention is based on the water quality treatment rather than the quantity as would be if you were an inland property. So we have provided sufficient water quality retention for the new roof and essentially all impervious areas on the site. There'll be a stormwater detention system. This will be underground, located off the driveway here, as well as a lower one down below that'll pick up the remainder of the impervious area. There are tidal wetlands on the property along with numerous other environmental resources here. And before we get into the environmental and landscaping of the project, I just want to say we've received, as Mr. Talamelli said, there have been comments from numerous reviewers. We have received them, one of which came this morning or early afternoon. We did review them and we prepared to provide written response, not this evening as we didn't have sufficient time to do it. But that being said, we have reviewed it. If there's any questions on that, we can certainly discuss them tonight. But you will get a full revised package of our plans as well as any necessary report revisions as well as an itemized response to the peer review comments. With that, I'd like to introduce Brian Carey from my office that will be walking you through some of the environmental aspects of the project as well as the landscaping plan.
Thank you. Again, my name is Brian Carey. I'm with Landtech in Westport, Connecticut. I am a professional wetland scientist and a state of Connecticut certified arborist. I did develop the arborist report as requested by staff. It was basically a quick walkthrough of the site, just based on the timing. We did, as Kurt said, we did receive a pretty thorough report from ELS Solutions today. We have gone through it, or at least I've gone through it quickly. We will be able to provide answers to most of the questions in here. We do need to discuss certain things with the applicant, but most of it is, most of the comments we're basically in agreement, but we do need to basically button some things up. The one issue I know that keeps coming up about the site is obviously its proximity to coastal resources, but the one large thing, if anyone goes out there, they'll see is that there's an existing steep slope here next to the house. The goal is to preserve as much of the vegetation along the steep slope to prevent further erosion, to prevent any erosion, and to maintain that slope in as a vegetated buffer. If you do go out there and look at that, it is suffering from some old growth, some of the shrubby type of issues from a non-maintained buffer area. Some of the trees probably should be removed. There's black cherry that show obvious signs of decay. There's a bunch of snags out there. So the idea to come in and we'll make a more robust planting plan, but it would be to come in here and supplement what can be left there, or what would be reasonable to leave there as far as its health and vigor, and to supplement the plantings along that buffer. The other thing, there is a restriction on the property, a restrictive covenant that does not allow the planting of trees in the area that's hashed right here. Nothing can be planted there that would grow above 8 feet. So as far as planting choices, it is a little bit limited as far as putting mostly shrubs that can't grow larger than 8 feet, coastal talon shrubs. So again, we're going to plant a coastal seed mix along this area and allow that to grow, and then we're going to put in some bayberry to allow this area to basically form a hedgerow. If you get down below the CJL, there is quite a bit of Spartina and high tide bush that we think, we probably will not supplement that and go into the tidal wetland area. It is growing rather robustly in that area already. And we, again, we plan to, as part of the arborist report says, create an exclusion zone here during the project, so there will actually be no incursions into those areas that we have deemed most sensitive to impacts, and that, do provide an existing buffer. We're going to work with what's there and supplement it as best as possible. Again, we do have an extensive list of comments from the peer review. None of them, again, most of them we're in agreement with. So we'll be able to kind of tighten that up for the next meeting, and rather than go through this, one by one right now, I'd rather provide a response and then we'll be able to answer questions. Again, just due to the time frame of receiving this, we do want to confer with the applicant to make sure that we're both on the same page. I don't want to make representations on his point that we might not be in agreement with at this time. But things like having an organic type fertilizers rather than chemical fertilizers, things like that we've already discussed it with him, and being with the proximity to Holly Pond, that's not an issue. That was one of the comments that kind of jumped out on us. But again, the arborist report will go back out there and make sure that we really detail every tree. And I don't know if the commission has been out to the site and completed a site walk, but you could probably understand some, based on that site walk, you could probably understand some of the conditions of having down trees and the difficulty of maintaining rather than clearing and replanting under a new understory. We're going to have to create a balance there. So that being said, I'll reserve some of this for the next meeting, and we'll prepare a robust response to this. That being said, I'll give it back to Kurt. I'm here to answer any questions too, if there's anything after.
Okay, I'd now like to have Doug Vanderhorn come up and speak to the kind of the iterations of how the house location that is now and the kind of concept of the design that suits Mr. Ross.
Yeah. I'm Doug Vanderhorn, Vanderhorn Architects, and this will take you through a little bit of how we started the design and some of the thinking that went into it. I'll start with mentioning that the Rosses have lived here for many years and owned both of these properties. They're very familiar with, obviously, Holly Pond and the area. So they gave me direction about what they like about living there, how they really want the house to face, and where the best views are, where the sun rises, all of that they're very familiar with. So they also mentioned, of course, like every waterfront client I have, that the idea is to be close to the water, to get the best views, to avoid staring at this adjacent house, which they have out in front to either side. So the direction that the house faced was quite important. And the restrictions on the lot actually allowed for us initially to develop the house to be closer to the water on this point, which didn't quite work out. We want to get out there with some of what we can. In this case, the breakfast room pokes out toward that. If you visited the site, you realize that there is not a lot of flat space on this site. It is kind of paralleling the long line between this and the adjacent lot. And so our house is stretching along that line initially, and then, of course, wants to stretch out toward the view or perpendicular to the view. So anything that develops toward the west will head down that slope. So we couldn't, develop the site if it were too narrow. I always, when I lay out a house initially, I always like to pass by the front door on my way to the garage. There's nothing wonderful about pulling up to somebody's garage and then walking back to the front door. So we started the driveway on this side. There is the original driveway cut for this property that we're reusing over here. There's still some paving there from it. And we'll pass by the front door and see the front of the house and then proceed to the garage side. And of course, this area is all flat, so it's easy on the cars as opposed to anything at this side, which would give us a basement-only garage situation. So in keeping with the flood requirements, this piece of the house that we're living on is about 10 feet above the ground at this end. So that does give us some opportunities if we wanted to reduce foundation in that area or perforate that foundation in that area. I think that covers, how we set about to develop it. It is an odd-shaped site. It is basically got a triangular building area, so we just did the best we could. And so I think we're probably all open to questions, and we're kind of in a listening mode for this meeting for sure.
Rick, should we,
That's the end of the presentation.
is that the end of the
Would
presentation?
you like to see the architecturals? You probably all looked at them.
Anybody?
I looked at them.
What?
If you'd like to,
Is
if
that-
not, we can,
No, I think people have looked at the architecturals, right?
I mean, I'm not sure the appearance of the house is what
No, it's
is
not that
concerning.
relevant for us. I
Right.
mean, that'll be planning and
It's
zoning.
not an oversized house for the size of the lot. It's substantially smaller than the Ross's house next door.
Rick, should we go to,
Commission members.
Good. okay.
You were gonna ask them first, or do you want us to?
Why don't you go first?
Want us to go first?
Bill?
You go first? Okay. Holly Pond is a one-of-a-kind natural resource, so I'm very big on making sure we don't get any more issues there. And one of the biggest issues that's happening in there now is the lack of oxygen levels because of all the fertilizer that's coming in, causing these massive algae blooms. And so I want to make sure that we are having areas that are no-mow zones. I don't like the area, if you put down things and say, we're not going to use pesticides or fertilizers, because the next guy turning around will. We need to demarc certain areas that are definitely going to be, I like to call them no-mow zones that become natural. I understand your, excuse me, your height restriction, but that whole front area, I think should just be kept from any kind of runoff coming off of the grasslands, both pesticides, fertilizers that are encroaching entirely on Holly Pond from many directions. And this is a good point. We should try to control some of this. That's one of my issues. The other issue is when I went down there at high tide, stake number 5, which is part of your foundation, I was I was in the water and 4.5 feet away. We have pictures to show it. I was touching that with my paddle for my kayak. I mean, that's just way too close. This whole report that's come across from our peer review has tremendous questions in there that I'm going to need to have fully satisfied before I feel comfortable about this. And I'll stop with that.
Rick, I wasn't sure when you made mention of the submissions, whether you mentioned the state deep report and whether
Yes.
you did. So I'm just maybe following off Bill Wright's comment. Have you seen the state deep report?
yes.
So there are a couple of comments in here. that are in the summary and recommendations section that relates to the home coming close within about 13 feet to the tidal wetlands, and obviously when we have high tide, we may have a different issue. And within 7 feet of the CJL, the applicant should consider moving the home outside of the coastal flood hazard zone. So I would like to know what your response to that might be.
Well, I think that concern kind of has two parts to it. One being proximity to the high tide area, and the other being relocating outside of the coastal flood area. Just for reference, the FEMA flood zone, my pen is tracing here, kind of bisects the site. For us to develop a project, a new house, a development outside of the flood zone completely is just not practical for a site such as this. When you take into perspective the area of Darien this is, while I know financial is not something that's a consideration, you know, there has to be some kind of understanding that these pieces of property are very valuable. Potential homeowners and homeowners are going to spend tremendous amounts of money to own property here. I think it's reasonable for someone buying a piece of property in this area. And if you take a look at the other properties around Holly Pond, especially in this little cove area as well, it's not unreasonable for a homeowner to think that they can develop that piece of property in a similar manner to the other properties around there, which is what we're doing. And on the further point on that is that all of these houses that are developed around Holly Pond, many of which are in the flood zone, and there are FEMA guidance and standards for developing within that, which we are meeting. So I think the point is well taken, and we will absolutely consider the commission's concerns, the peer review concerns of looking to see if we can find room to get ourselves more of a buffer between the high tide and the tidal wetland lines. But I think the prospect of developing this piece of property to be completely out of the FEMA flood zone is just not feasible on this piece of property.
Just looking at the deep report again, the reviewer, Ms. Julia Kedrzinski, indicates that the impact, and I understand the comment on coastal flood zone, but her indication here is that the application as currently exists is potentially unacceptable as it degrades tidal wetlands, beaches, dunes, rocky shorelines. So I think there are two issues. One is the flood issue, but the second is maybe in relation to Bill Wright's observation is the preservation of Holly Pond and that coastal resource, including, according to this, I think they said that there was some shellfish and other aspects related to the coastal line.
I think a lot of the DEP comments and the comments from the consultant that we received today are duplicative, and we will address those. I think having a healthy and maintaining a healthy buffer after the construction process. So we're generally looking at two types of impacts: short-term impacts, which will mitigate through obviously erosion controls and best management practices that will be put in place during the actual construction, and then long-term impacts to those resources, which will mitigate through long-term mitigation through buffer plantings and making sure, as you said, that there's plants that are able to uptake any type of nitrogen or phosphorus that would be a contributing factor to the degradation of Holly Pond. If you go there is, even though it is up to the tidal wetlands, there is a pretty large Spartina high marsh that exists between the property and until you get out to the low marsh that is further out into Holly Pond. So that in itself acts as a buffer for any type of up gradient disturbance at the site. Holly Pond obviously is receiving numerous inputs, which are causing the degradation of the water quality, as you know, unfortunately, most of the tidal ponds are throughout the state. And I agree with you, Holly Pond is, it's one of the only tidal ponds in the state that's actually regulated as an inland wetland through this commission. I mean, there's obviously case law about that, so I understand the sensitivity of that. I don't think the development is any larger or out of character for the neighborhood, and I do think that there's an opportunity with this application to put all of those types of mitigations in place, and we will address that as part of the comments that we received today, and also the DEP's comments.
Yeah, I guess I might take exception to using the other properties as benchmarks without understanding when those homes were constructed and what the state of coastline protection laws might have been at the time of those construction points, or even predecessor buildings that might have been torn down and the footprint existed. So
Sure, that is a fair point, and, by no means are we, trying to disagree with you or negate what you're saying. The points are well taken, and frankly, we have share the similar want to preserve this, and again, we're looking to, from here, between the next hearing, we're gonna go back and, work to get this closer, and buffer plantings, types of buffer plantings, demarcation, things like that. We're willing to work with the commission as well as your peer reviewer to come to a development here that we can all be happy with, both from the town side and from the development side.
thank you for that. Thank you.
Yeah, I was gonna, as chairman, I was gonna say, hey, these inland wetland watercourse regulations started in 1977. And so, actually passed in 74, but by the time it got down to Darien, 76, 77. And there was a lot of development before that. And so, I mean, take an obvious one that's fairly near you, which is in Rutland Bay, okay? We would have never let that happen under today's scenarios. As I recall, that was built in about 1923. And I don't know how many, dump trucks fill was put in there, but it happened, and it happened. And so to say that, well, they got away with it, or they did it, well, they did it under different circumstances, okay? And so I don't think, given the situation, if someone had proposed that to us, if this commission had existed back then, it would never have happened, okay? And so the wetlands regulations have gotten tighter over the years, and as people begin to understand effects of building, of runoff, and so you're an engineer. When did people really start putting in Coltexes, for example? And it was in response to people going, well, that house was built next door and I'm getting flooded, okay? And so, okay, well, they studied it and they figured it out. Enough preaching on that. I'm interested in reasonable and prudent alternatives. What can you discuss them? What have you considered to be? What alternatives have you considered to this current proposal?
Here before you tonight, I'm not prepared to give you a detailed, prudent alternatives. We've explored various, ranging from, as mentioned in the peer review, is a no-build alternative, but, things like that.
Well, that's not really an alternative, because it is a building lot.
Right, that's what I'm saying. There's a balance between
so,
prudent and feasible.
Mr. Ross has a right to build on it.
Exactly.
And that's not the question. That's not really an alternative. I mean,
What I'm getting at is that we don't have,
I'm not his architect or his engineer, but I just would like to think about what reasonable and prudent alternatives have been considered, because that's part of the application that has to be considered. Okay,
course.
that has to be, it's part of our application that said that you have to consider reasonable, prudent alternatives.
We understand that there's a finding significant impact, and we will have feasible and prudent alternatives drafted as part of this response. We need to discuss that further with the applicant. Obviously, the existing alternative in front of you is the preferred alternative based on his desire to develop the lot within the limits of, obviously, the zoning laws and the topography of the property. Obviously, as Kurt said, no build alternative is always what we start with as a benchmark, even as a building lot, just because it shows that there is, no build. While it's feasible, it's not prudent for the applicant. I know it sounds like a kind of a dumb statement, but that's generally where you'd start with the alternatives. A lot of times to say there's only 3 alternatives, but no build is obviously begins with them. Obviously, you've seen our preferred alternative. We will come forward with 2 other alternatives that will be shown, that will show, how the site could actually be built bigger under the existing zoning law, and how we've come to this as the preferred alternative. We do think that there is other mitigation that can be incorporated into this design, that would be another alternative that would satisfy the desire of the homeowner.
Jim?
Sorry, can I ask?
Please.
Do any of the other feasible and prudent alternatives involve further setback from the pond itself? Size and scale is one thing, but I think the reasonable, prudent alternative would be something that would be a little bit more away from the pond.
Yeah, I don't want to sound nebulous, because the architect and the design team need to discuss that
understand.
before I, put my foot in my mouth for the applicant, which I'm not trying to do
I understand.
without his guidance. So,
And we'll probably have public comment too, and
Yep.
that will.
Absolutely.
also
So,
Thank you.
again, we appreciate all the comments we received tonight. We don't try to turn this into a design charrette, but we understand that what is being presented right now is probably not what would be approved in the future without additional mitigation and some design changes.
Thank you.
Jim?
Yes, Mr. Chairman. I've been to the site 3 times, including this afternoon. And it was very helpful to have the stakes. There's the pool stake, the building stake, and with the plan in hand while walking the site. It was not today, but it was the first time I was there. I said, wow, this is a project. I think I'll have a lot more to say after you gentlemen, ladies and gentlemen, are able to answer the various feedback from the letter that I realized you only just received today at our next hearing. But I do echo from walking the site 3 different times into the woods today to find all the various stakes that you outlined. Many of the thoughts you've heard from my fellow 3 commissioners, but I think you'll hear more from me next time we meet. Thank you, sir.
Hi. I would say the same. There are a lot of questions that I had that were also raised in the Environmental Land Solutions report. But a couple of quick questions. Have there ever been any type of structure on this property previously?
Yes.
Okay,
There was
because you
a
had-
home that was, actually, let me pull up the survey. and I
So there had been a home there previously?
Yes, there had.
Okay.
I'll clarify.
Excuse me, sir. You mind coming to the, please identify yourself and your address for the record?
Mitch Ross, the homeowner, just because obviously I'm familiar with it. Originally, in 1947, there was a home over both lots. That was built over both lots. Then that home was taken down in early 2000s. So there hasn't been anything there. There was the one house at 10 Nickerson. This at 17 Nickerson has been vacant since 2010, 2011.
So when the one home was taken down, the lot was subdivided?
The lot was It was a legal case. So the lot, when the house was put up, there was no law of mergers in the state of Connecticut. So the court ruled that because there was no law of, the law of mergers didn't exist in 1947, you could put up a house that went over 2 lots because they were 2 subdivided lots. You could take that house down at any time because when it was built, that law didn't exist, and you would reinstitute the 2 lots. And the only reason it was slightly under 1 acre versus before it was slightly over 1 acre was that they changed, the state or the federal government changed the definition of mean high water. So it shrunk it from being 1.02 acres to 0.98 acres. So that's why both lots were complying with over 1 acre at the time, and then they shrunk when they changed the definition.
Thank you. Good to know.
Another quick question. You had mentioned that the house is not oversized for the size of the lot. Could you just give kind of a sense of the size and scale of the proposed home?
As far as in relation to the building code, the zoning code rather?
Well, it's...
Or square footage wise of the house?
Yeah.
The footprint is roughly 5,500 square feet.
Okay. Okay. As I mentioned, and as some of the other commissioners mentioned, I do have some other concerns that were addressed, so I will look forward to some of your revised plan. But I just wanted to mention, you had made a point of, or I don't know if it was you, but in a report from your firm made a point of talking about the potential adverse impacts, and you mentioned that the project does not degrade water quality, degrade circulation patterns, and so on and so forth. It says it doesn't degrade wildlife, but there are a number of trees coming out, as we heard, and I'm just wondering, could you give us a sense of how many mature trees would need to be removed for this project?
Roughly between 25 and 30 trees will come down. As far as significant goes, that's a much smaller percentage. I don't have that exact number. I mean, there's certainly some fairly substantial trees. Certainly not any specimen trees, as I would call it. Obviously, all trees are valuable, but as I'm aware, there's no, and Brian, correct me if I'm wrong, if there's any rare species of trees. So within the building footprint, to answer you directly, between 25 and 30 trees will come down as a result of the development. Now, that's not to say that we can't plant some additional trees to help mitigate that. We would be open to that. And again, I think if I can leave the commission with one thing from tonight's hearing, is that we're willing to work with you, and we're going to work to a mutual benefit to the town and to the developer here.
Right.
There's room for additional buffer, different types of buffer plantings. You have a fantastic peer reviewer here. I've worked with Matt on many projects in other towns, so I think we can come to a great solution here.
Yeah, no, that's great, because, I mean, it specifically says in this report that, the project does not degrade wildlife, and I do feel that removal of such a large number of trees does have an adverse impact on wildlife. I mean, I've been there 3 times, and all 3 times that I've been there, I've both heard and seen lots of birds, and I do consider them wildlife.
Certainly.
So I look forward to hearing your revised plan. Thank you.
I'm going to choose to hold my questions until the next time, because I have some of the same questions as well that were documented.
Okay.
Thank you.
Rick, would you like to, you said you might want to have a question.
Sure. So again, we, staff in conjunction with the agency prepared a document and outlined what is pertinent to the review of the application. And again, that was a February 7th, 2023 letter. And just in terms of importance that needs to be addressed as part of the response coming up in the next several weeks or months. In terms of the arborist's report, I think everybody recognizes that trees will be lost as a result of that, but what's the importance of trees from in the coastal regulations and in inland wetland regulations, they talk about, diverse landscapes. And so if you look around Holly Pond, the idea is to try to keep some of the diversity of the landscape between, what's tidal wetland and developed space and the trees themselves. Also, the stability of slopes with the loss of trees, what the impact is going to be. I think any arborist's report should identify any trees of value and then come up with recommendations. Yeah, maybe we can do some alternative design elements that you can save some additional trees of value. But also, what are we going to do pre-construction, during construction, post-construction? One thing that was kind of interesting here was is there is one large tree that's on the abutting property that the canopy extends pretty significantly onto this site. It's under this tree that they're doing their drainage structure. I think any part of an arborist report to say, hey, this tree has some value. Can the drainage structure be removed so that there's no impact on the tree and the root systems? Or, under an arborist review, can you do things that will enable that tree to survive, but you can still have your drainage? Things like selective root pruning that I've seen that's under the arborist review, as opposed to going to a machine and just digging a hole and pulling those things out. So any recommendations that the arborist comes up with should be incorporated into the design and the landscaping plan. In terms of habitats, I noted that this area is on the Natural Diversity Database's area of resource. It's in that there should be a petition to the state to see what is the potentially affected area of resources, and there be a response to it, that if in fact this development is going to diminish the habitats that are there. You have a stand of trees that are on the slope. You don't see that very often. Are they nesting sites? Are they roosting sites? What are they, if they're anything? And then the board can make a determination of impact as well. I think the big thing here is that discussion of alternatives. I think in most of my years, I haven't seen a residential development that close to the edge of water or tidal wetlands. Again, I'm just thinking back, I haven't recall anything that close.
Thinking about it, Rick, I've been in this commission a while, and if this was a small brook or something like that, 4 feet would just, Jim, we haven't done anything like that, have we? Where we permitted a permanent garage or foundation next to a stream. And we're talking Holly Pond here, which is a little better, a little larger than a stream. So I'm just trying to think of that. Do you remember anything like that?
No, not of that dimension there.
No. Okay.
4 feet. No.
And there's got to be a reasonable review of this alternative scheme, because the property is segmented basically in half with the flood hazard boundary. But alternatives, it doesn't go necessarily, everything has to be 100 feet away, everything has to be outside of the floodplain, is what is a reasonable balance that is, first you look, can you diminish it? And I'm sure there'll be information provided to say that it can't be avoided, but can you diminish the impacts? Can the dwelling be pushed up the slope? Can you reduce the amount of flood exposure? A planning tool, not a planning tool, but in the last perhaps 5 or 10 years is that agencies and regulatory bodies should be looking at sea level rise. So you have what's shown on the flood map, but again, you have to think a little bit forward, is that 20 years from now, 27 years from now, they have projected at least a 20-inch to 24-inch rise in sea level here. So with the increased veracity of storms, is it really prudent to be placing And I'm sure I've seen some of the dwellings that this team has provided. The beautiful homes have it that close and subject to such flood exposure. So I think there has to be a really, kind of concise and clear discussion of the alternatives. What can be done, not just simply mitigating, and at times it looks like a landscaping Band-Aid placed on it, but, is there a way to move it away from the edge of pond, the edge of tidal wetlands? And again, that's for a variety of reasons too. I think a lot of this also goes towards buildability. It is pretty, a big footprint on the house. It is quite a bit of ground disturbance and excavation and grade change. It's the use of high walls, even some right along a property boundary. A lot of this alternative is, what can you do to diminish the impacts? Diminish the grade change, lessen the disturbance, reduce impacts on trees, and maybe doing things also that even relate to, more sustainable kind of impacts or practices. Yes, we have a steep slope coming up from the road, but there's a lot of imperviousness here. Can you reduce the imperviousness? Often pollution is equated to the amount of imperviousness, not just on individual sites, but watershed wide. I think another thing that's important here is there should be a statement concerning the impacts of the dynamics of the flood. Now, everybody thinks about, well, what's a flood impact? Is it just rise? In coastal situations, I worked on hundreds of coastal applications. It's not just rise, and often it's not rise when you're in the coastal zones. How does it change the dynamic of the flood? The flood comes in, it doesn't automatically stop and not be a wave action. There is some turbulence. You can deflect, you can reflect, you can move water in different directions. You can narrow where water comes in and it comes out with greater velocity. These are all things that should be looked at. And I think from like a coastal engineer could probably give this a once-over quick look and just say, we don't think it's going to have an adverse impact on drain. Again, you have to remember about adjoining properties. Beautiful home to the right, beautiful home to the left, but also on resources. Are you causing erosion? You have potential for erosions that's going to scour out the edge of this property, loss of property, loss of tidal wetland, et cetera. I also think that there's the drainage and water quality analysis. We have some very good comments from the town's consultant on that, and again, those need to be addressed. The mitigation is, I think, a bit sparse, and I think there's a good opportunity that for a balanced development that expands the edge and comes up with and addresses all the things that we've already talked about in terms of use of native, salt-tolerant native plant species, things that are going to have habitat value, things that can reduce. One of the things in coastal area management is if you have large structures and walls, do you want to be seeing that from the sea, from the ocean? What's the view that you have? It's about trying to reduce the bulk of some of these structures, and it is important. It is important to do that, since many of these houses are so high up because of the flood. But again, striking that balance. In terms of structural floodproofing, I think you always can structurally floodproof a home. It's enough design details and design. That letter went into great detail on how the home can be constructed. I'm confident they can do that. You're allowing that bottom level to flood, and you have openings in it, and they're sized appropriately, and it's adjustment of grades on at least two sides. I'm pretty confident that can be done. And I think what the flood is, one of the elements is, how often, how voracious it's going to be, how impactful is it going to be impactful. Every time there's a high tide, is it going to be a 2-year storm, 10-year storm, or whatever? So I'm pretty confident that they can flood proof it. I think they can figure it out. And again, I guess the last thing is, the design details that we're given so far for the house were for the house only, for the project. Note that there will have to be similar things provided, design plans, structural engineer certifications for the pool, the walls, and other elements that have flood exposure. And a couple little things I just noticed from a design perspective is like access to this, there's some very tight radiuses that maybe they should at least be considerate of, like the turning radiuses into the garage. Is it actually workable? You back up and, there's retaining walls along the property boundaries. Those things that they have to be comfortable with. Not necessarily a thing for this commission to worry about, but I just, it has to be a comfortable design too, not just going from setback line to setback line. So I look forward to working on the project and seeing what they come up with in terms of the responses to everybody's comments. But I think, again, there's some major things, major nuts to crack at the beginning, which have to do with alternatives, extending the setback, and I saw that everybody was using the word robust tonight. I haven't heard that term in ages and used it 45 times already tonight. But in terms of the landscaping and using design elements to make sure that the development can move forward with a minimal impact on the regulated areas.
Okay, is there any other commissioner that would like to speak? Okay.
Just one quick housekeeping
Sure.
measure. Comments, Rick, to the consultant, can those be through you if there's a joint site meeting? Or can we go directly to the consultant? I don't want there to be any missteps between the town and,
Oh.
yeah.
Okay, I understand. It probably should be directed to the commission
Okay.
or the staff, and we can make sure that. we'll
Because
get
there's some technical issues, like there's a lot of Norway maple out there on the site. That's an invasive, but it's also good for structural soil. So, that's a judgment call as to whether, as part of an invasive plan, it's got some value as a habitat and an erosion control, but at the same time, you see plans that eradicate all Norway maple. So, you kind of work against yourself. There's snags out there, but in order to create a good planting medium for a new understory to increase the riparian buffer, we're going to have to remove that. Or, there's some type of give and take there that's going to, from a design perspective, that I'd like to discuss directly with with not only you, but also with the.
We'll figure it out. I mean,
Yeah.
I would think essentially that we probably should be directed here.
No problem.
And we'll figure it out.
Thank
That's the
you.
most constructive way of moving forward.
Okay.
You have
Should we
questions
open?
from Matt?
Pardon?
Public? Matt, too?
Matt, would you like to?
Good evening, Matthew Pop, a landscape architect, professional wetland scientist. I have a BS in horticulture from the University of Connecticut and a master's in landscape architecture from the University of Georgia. I was a 16-year member of the Greenwich Inland Wetlands and Watercourses Agency, and I've been in the field for almost as long as Rick, but I don't think not quite, about 35 years or so. I do spend time birding Holly Pond. Holly Pond is noted for its gulls, I would say, at the kind of the northern end. I know there's people from out of state come to Holly Pond to bird. Actually, it's a common gull that's a rare gull, even though it's called common gull, that they come to see. And it's loaded with egrets and herons, which are species of special concern. And again, Holly Pond's a great resource for wildlife. I did prepare a report, kind of reviewing the application. There was maybe 5 main topics that I reviewed. One was the site plan. The second was the CAM report. The third was the arborist report. Then the architectural drawings, just briefly. and then the landscape plan. In my report, I kind of have 8 topics. The first one is missing information or deficiencies and inconsistencies. It seemed like those 5 items, the site plans, the CAM report, arborist report, architectural drawings, and landscape plan, they weren't coordinated. It seemed to me like those people never met in the same room to review the plans. And then I think that just to start off before I go through the report, being that this is right up against tidal wetlands and right up against the CJL line, there's no room for error in this application. And if this house is much further back, there was an impact. I would say it could be small, but on this, the same impact is amplified because there's no room to mitigate through a buffer. So let me just start. I'm just going to go through them, kind of quickly. I think there's 43, I numbered them 43, items that I listed in the report. The first one is kind of inconsistencies and deficiencies. Kind of the first thing I looked at when I went to the site is the tree plan. The survey that I had that's shown on the site plan, some of those trees are no longer on the site. So I'm thinking off by the road, would the driveway have been shifted further away from the trees to the north? But to me, it looked like they may be trying to save a tree that's not there. So again, the survey should be updated to show which trees are there and which trees are not there. The second thing, actually it's probably usually the first thing I do, is I go to the Natural Diversity Database map. It's online, and it shows where the species of special concern, endangered, or threatened are located. The entire Holly Pond, including this entire site, is located within that highlighted area. So right away, if the applicant should probably send the application to the DEEP requesting information on if this project would have an impact to any listed species. They may not tell you what the species is. They may just come back and say no impact, or they may say there is an impact and here's what you should do. But again, that you can't assess the impacts of this project until you have or till you get correspondence from them. The third thing was I walked down to the tidal wetlands to look at the wetland flags to see how close they are. I want to see if they're correct. There's no wetland flags up. So I know that the flag, I think the wetland line was done in 2008. That was 15 years ago. Did the tidal wetland line change? If it moves a foot or 2 feet, that might be 20% of the buffer in this application. So the wetland flags need to be rehung, and then you could verify if it is correct or not. This is kind of a minor thing on the site plans of the restricted area because it's a visual restriction. Probably be a good idea to have comments on the plan just saying what it actually is, so a landscape contractor knows what it is. Now they may think just so it's clear. There's a tree protection zone line on the plans. It's different on the 2 plans. So I don't know how it's different. One's curved and one's straight. The pool equipment and the air conditioning units and the generator should be on all the plans. Now, you don't want to find out, I think the pool equipment and the generator are up in front, but on some of the plans, the pool equipment isn't shown. But the air conditioning pads, we need to know where those are. We don't want them behind the house, between the 6 or 7 feet between the house and the CJL line. Are they going there? No, I don't know. Probably not. They're probably going to be on the side and raised up, but they need to be shown on the plan. There's an architectural cross-section. I think it's number 2 on A3-2. The grades on that don't correspond to the grades on a grading plan. They're off by 2 feet. So they show the grade at the house at elevation 9. The grading plan shows you at elevation 7. So that footing goes down 2 feet further. So that footing, the bottom of that footing is probably going to be, elevation 3 or 4. So that makes a difference, especially if you're going to be dewatering the footing. Where's the water go to? I'll get into that a little bit later. The plans, they have an X of the trees that are coming out. But the house site, when you look at the plan, there's no X's because the shading of the house, covers over the X's. So it doesn't look like there's many trees. So when you're walking around out there, I'm out there looking at the plan, I can't figure out where I am. So again, the plans need to show which trees are coming out. It needs to be clearly labeled. Again, then we're on to number 10, general site development concerns. The erosion controls is waterward of the CJL line. That's, if you're waterward of that line, you need a permit from the state. So, and I think maybe there's a double row silt fence, and maybe both of them are in it. Number 11, the house is, maybe 6 feet, 5 to 6 feet from the CJL line. Now, how is that constructed without going into the CJL area? Now, I'm not sure. There probably should be like a chain link fence along that CJL line to, prevent anyone from going in there. But they need to provide details for that. Number 12, the arborist report says there's not going to be any disturbance within the tree protection zone, but then the silt fence, and I think there's landscaping that's going to be in there. So some of those comments are not consistent, or they're off. In the front yard, there's a stockpile area. It's extremely small. I think you need a realistic stockpile area, especially since the site is sloping. Is it just in the front yard, or is it going to expand to the northern side of the house? Number 14, Rick kind of mentioned this already. The backup space out of the garage is, I would say, substandard. Hopefully they're driving small cars. They get in the garage. I don't think they'll be able to get in the first bay, making that turn. And then, as Rick noted, when you back out of the garage, there's a wall right on the property line. Number 15. Now, how do you build a wall on the property line? Normally, walls have drainage behind them. Is this wall not going to have any drainage? No, I would. Maybe it's a block wall, but I would think on a project like this in this neighborhood, it's not a block wall. Number 16, the house, a couple of corners go right up to the setback line. When you zoom in and you keep zooming in, it looks like that line, the building might go over the setback line. I'm not sure. Maybe the plans need to be enlarged at those areas just to detail that. But hopefully, when they come back with an alternative, it would be further back. There needs to be a cross-section through the pool. For the walls, I think the walls are showing at maybe a foot or maybe 18 inches in width, but some of those walls are probably going to be 2 feet in width or so, or maybe even wider than that. And that matters when the pool is right up against the setback line and when you're so close to the tidal wetlands. So we need a detail for that. Number 18 is minor. By the garage, there's a walkway, comes around the house, doesn't connect to anything. It just kind of ends. For drainage, the footing drains, where do they discharge to? The footing drains, they're probably going to be elevation, 3.5 or so where they discharge. So that's going to be well within the CJL line. And if there's a constant supply of fresh water going in to salt water or brackish areas, it's going to dilute the salt water. That's going to be an area where I'm concerned about. That's where you're going to get Phragmites growth. And again, Phragmites, non-native invasive species. So again, if you're diluting the tidal waters in that area, I would say that's an adverse impact. That is an adverse impact.
Sorry, could you define Phragmites for us?
Phragmites, it's the common reed. It's probably grows 8 feet in height. It spreads. It's aggressive. It spreads. It takes over habitat. So again, it's non-native and invasive. Extremely tough to get rid of.
Thank you.
And it grows in brackish areas
With more
fresh water. Yeah,
fresh water as opposed to salt water.
Like if you were on the coast, the way you would get rid of it is if you had added more salt water to it, you could stunt its growth or reduce it. But diluting salt water, you're going to promote it.
Thank you.
No, there is none there now, but when you stick in a drainage pipe Normally, disturbed areas is where you get invasive species coming in. There's lots of seeds around, so I would definitely be concerned with that. Where the Coltex is too, if there's a discharge, again, you're so close to tidal wetlands, the discharge downslope of that we could also dilute the coastal waters. And again, that's another area where we may get phragmites, again, downstream from the Coltex. Number 21, the silt fence where it's up. If you get a big storm, I'm not sure what the wave actions are, but will the silt fence be knocked over, or does it have to be reinforced somehow? And it probably should be reinforced. Let's see, 22 I think we talked about. Number 23, I think we kind of touched on it earlier. Again, the foundation is, the footing drains will be below or be at the mean high water elevation. So where do they discharge to? The landscape plan, I prepare landscape plans like every single day. That's probably 80% of my business. This is one that's extremely lacking. There's some areas I couldn't figure out why they were putting some plants where they would go. The 6 shad along the driveway out in the middle, kind of a maintained area. I would think that those would not be there for the long term. Those probably would be gone pretty quickly. The plants that they're proposing, I would say they're undersized, 18 inches to 2 feet. In this area where there's probably lots of deer, they should be 3 to 4 feet in height. And again, the numbers should probably be greatly enhanced. Again, we're removing 25 trees, shade trees, or whatever. How many trees are we proposing back? I don't think there's any trees we're proposing back. Normally along the coast, I have massings of evergreen trees. Evergreen trees are great for wintering owls along the coast, so that would be a great thing to have. The landscape plan needs to show where the limit of lawn, the true lawn, is going to be. There is, let's see. Again, number 25, how's that area along the coast behind the house? Now, how is it maintained? There's no information on, how it's, is it meadow, lawn, thickets? It's unknown. And I'm going to jump to the 28. There's a coastal tolerant grass seed mix. To me, without a description of how that's going to be maintained, that's to me is going to be a lawn area. And that coastal tolerant grass mix goes right up to the tidal wetlands along the entire length of their property. So how do you put that in that mix? You clear out all the leaves, all the down debris, all the stuff that's great for wildlife habitat. And then you probably do relocate the silt fence back because it's all going to be disturbed and reseeded. So I think that needs to be kind of rethought. Again, we want that larger buffer of, we want the lawn back as far as possible from Holly Pond, so that to protect the water quality. If there's any fertilizers that wash off, we want them to go through, a buffer first. Is there lighting on the house that's shining down into the tidal wetlands? Again, you're right there on the wetlands. That's unknown. There's a dead snag right behind the house. I heard that that's probably going to come out. Snags and snag is a dead tree, great for wildlife habitat. There's one in my town in Greenwich. The eagles roost on it, and if they're not there, the peregrine falcons are on it. Great for wildlife habitat. So those snags, in my opinion, they should stay. And if not, they're going to come out. They need to show specifically which ones are going to come out. And if they're taking them out, how do they mitigate for that? And again, we want to leave that kind of that woody debris within the within the natural areas. Typically, I probably wouldn't put this comment in. Landscape irrigation, behind the house, is any proposed? Again, you're right up against the tidal wetlands and the CJL line. You're only again like 6 or 7 feet. are they going to be installing lines within that area? If the house is further back, irrigation, that comment wouldn't be here. Again, we want the limit of lawn area. We want to protect it. I would say that be protected by boulders or a stone wall so that the landscape contractor doesn't go into that area and mow it down routinely like a lawn area. 33, the arborist report. Arborist report probably should list, every tree, over like 8 inches or so, and identify each one. Cherry trees may not look great for wildlife habitat. So if they're evaluating them, they need to evaluate them not for aesthetics, but for, I would say based on wildlife habitat. We'll jump to 35. There's an invasive mitigation plan I guess they're proposing. I haven't seen it. I'm not a fan of Norway maples, but if you're taking Norway maples out, they should be replaced, with oaks or something. So again, if there is an invasive management plan, that should be provided to us. I kind of disagree with some of the comments that they have in the arborist report. It says that many of the trees within the uplands on the site, offer little in the way of biodiversity and habitat for wildlife. Again, those trees that provide a buffer to the holly pond, you probably have roosting egrets in them. Throughout the summer, you probably have osprey on them. Again, great habitat for wildlife. Even the sassafras, the seedlings and saplings provide great habitat. They provide that thick buffer down low. The arborist report should also provide measures, how to protect the tree during construction and also for the long term. Is there any, after the site's developed, do they go back in there and take a second look at these trees? Is there anything they could do? The CAM report, the coastal resources identified in the report should be the ones that are listed on the plan. There's a couple that are missing in them. One coastal resource, Rocky Shorefront, number 40. I don't know where that is. There's some rocks out there. It looks like in the corner of the site that they put for erosion control purposes years and years ago. I'm not sure if that's what they're referring to. The CAN report also says that collecting and treating stormwater runoff is a beneficial impact to coastal resources. I would say treating runoff is not a beneficial impact. It's just a way of mitigating it. That's not a benefit. Number 42. It's just 42. We just need a larger buffer to protect the water quality of Holly Pond. 43, alternatives. The report says nothing about a no-build alternative. I don't know where that came from. It's not in my report. Some alternatives are obviously smaller house. When I was on the Greenwich Wetland Commission, we always looked, everybody, if you have a lot, you have the right for a house. But do you have the right for an amenity, like a swimming pool or a tennis court? So those are the things we obviously don't make a tennis court smaller, but the pools you make much smaller. This pool is it's huge. It's 50 feet, one length, and it's triangular. It's extremely large pool. So a much smaller pool, maybe no pool. Imagine if the site had no pool, what the buffer would look like. A lot of these questions, my concerns, would disappear with that. Could we have, permeable pavers, rain gardens, infiltration, more infiltration, protect that water quality of Holly Pond. At 43, let's see what 43C. Can we retain some of those plantings along the shore that I think they're going to be taken out? And then I think we already said it. A wider buffer. Again, it's a steep lot. Steep lots, the runoff runs quicker. So you probably, with a steeper lot, you probably need a larger buffer to filter the runoff. If it was, a 2%, 3% slope, the buffer probably could be a little bit smaller, but again, the steep slopes, we want a larger buffer. So, in my opinion, actually just sum up by saying that we're missing, I think, quite a bit of information still. Plans need to be coordinated, and I would say that this would have an adverse, so if it was built like this, would have an adverse impact to the coastal resources. There'd be, loss of trees and wildlife habitat. There'd probably, shoreline probably be subject to erosion. The lawn area right up to the tidal wetland line, that would be a great impact for water quality with, when it gets fertilized or lawn clippings, where do those go? There's a potential for phragmites, as I noted, and I think that these impacts are not mitigated for a landscape plan. So if there's any questions, I'll be happy to answer them.
I have one. When you did the survey out near the point, did you see any seagrass growing out there? Because there had been seagrass growing right on that point. A number of years ago, it unfortunately got mowed down. We called that in, and
So something like that, like once I don't see the tidal wetland line delineated, I kind of, I think it's going to be delineated sooner or later, and then I would go back and take a closer look at the actual plants.
Okay.
So you're saying on the south side?
It's right at the point.
Okay, yep.
It was
Yep.
right around that point and bent around a little bit toward
No,
the
it could-
west side.
I know, with kind of the larger storms lately, some of the tidal wetlands are being impacted or, eroded away
Right.
from wave action.
Okay. The only other question I had is we have a resident eagle that's in there now. I'm not saying that should be stopping any project or anything. Does that come up when you look in these resource
Which,
reviews?
an eel?
A resident eagle.
Or eagle?
Yeah. It's not always there. So
That
resident
probably
on.
will not come up.
Okay, and it's not a big deal, but
No,
it's another
Yeah.
showing of that we're
Yeah.
trying to keep this place.
Unless they know about it, at Eagles,
Yeah.
it seems like, in my town, there's a period that it's been moving from neighborhood to neighborhood each year. So I think the state just likes to know where they are, but they don't kind of show up on a map. I guess some of the original ones did. There's, like in Bridgeport, there's one that's on the map. But maybe that's what's on here. I don't know. Maybe that's what's there.
I'm just curious.
So, but there's quite a.
I'm not tying it into this project. I'm
No,
just
there's a
curious
number
about
more
it.
though, so. But eagles right now, again, they're increasing species,
Yeah.
so I probably wouldn't be concerned with them as much as, some of the other species.
Could you comment on, other than the displacement of the natural state of the land with respect to a pool, what other adverse effects might a pool so close to the CJL have? And I'm thinking lighting, fluoridation, are there other aspects of having a pool close to the CJL that could negatively impact?
Well, again, it would say, if you didn't have it, you would have a larger buffer,
Yep.
which could be, naturally maintained, a meadow or shrub thickets, and that could be used to filter, runoff from the site, stabilize the soil. Again, the pool, could be impacts from noise, but I think that's.
Noise and
that's a-
light.
Yeah, but again, that's just taking up, I would say, space that could be used to mitigate the impacts. And again, it's a large pool. And then the pool fence too, that's the other thing where I kind of want to know information about the walls, maybe the heights. Where's the pool fence go? Doesn't look like the walls are 4 feet in height in some spaces, so someone could climb up the walls to get into the pool, so it would have to be wrapped with a fence. So how do you get around the house to maintain the yard behind the house? So.
Anybody else, any commission member? No?
No, sir.
Okay. Then let's open it up to the public. Is there a member of the public that would like to speak?
I'm a member of the public.
I know that, Alec, thank you. I should,
Hi, good evening. My name is Amy Zavatakis. I'm an attorney with Rucci Law Group. I am here representing four fairly adjacent neighbors, Yvette and Peter Enkema Van Dyke, owners of 19 Nickerson Lane, Peter and Lisa Thorin, owners of 31 Outlook Drive, Justin and Lindsay Vinci, owners of 10 Nickerson Lane, and Alec and Gail Wiggin, owners of 14 Nickerson Lane. I don't really have much to say tonight. We obviously have just started looking at this, having gotten the public notice relatively recently. My neighbors are very concerned, my clients are very concerned with the scale of this project. There are substantial walls. On one side, we're looking at 10-foot walls just to support the foundation. We're looking at retaining walls right on the property line on the other side. This is a very sensitive area. My clients live there. They can tell you quite a bit about the wildlife that they see, about the natural resources that are there. There has been a lot of clear cutting in this area already. If you look at the site, my clients have photos of this site from 2008 when there was the one house on the double lot. And you can see how expansive the tree coverage was. So I just think we need to be very sensitive as we're going through this project, and I appreciate the comments that the commission has received already, and I think there is a lot of sensitivity being given. But I do think discussion was made just recently about the size of the pool. This design plan maximizes every bit of buildable area. It is designed triangularly to go right up to the setbacks everywhere that it can. And it is, I think and I think this has been stated, there is no room for error. The space between where the house is and the silt fencing is in certain areas, there's not barely any space to get by. I haven't heard a lot of discussion about what's going to happen during construction, other than correctly the fact that the silt fencing is in the coastal resources. There needs to be some discussion of how they intend to build this house and not impact the environment. Matt just brought up recently the dewatering when the footings are being poured. They're going to hit groundwater when they start to dig down. There's just based on where it's located, there's no way they're not going to. How are they going to do that? And I think that needs to be, the environmental impact of construction needs to be considered, as well as the environmental impact of whatever is built ultimately. We are ourselves working with some additional professionals, and we'll be taking a look at the plans. We're very interested to see the next set of iterations from the applicant. So I don't want to take too much of your time tonight, but I appreciate the care that the commission is giving with the review of this application.
Thank you.
Yes.
Is your charge to at some point submit a written report to the commission?
Yes, it will be, but I felt based on how little time we'd had to look at it and how much it seemed that there would be revised, it might make sense to wait until the next iteration. Thank
Any
you.
questions for her?
No, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Amy. Another member of the public, Alec, you were anxious?
Yeah, my name is Alec Wiggin, and I live at 14 Nickerson Lane. Lived there since 1987. And I'm directly across from the lot that's going to be built on. And I just want to express my concern for the environment there. I'm attentive to birds. I mean, it's just a hobby of mine. And there are lots of, there are great horned owl, there are lots of, 4 or 5 different hawk species. There are osprey, and a lot of ground birds as well. There's a lot of animals that, I mean, the foxes like to go, they love that lot, they go across that lot. There are mink on my property and mink on the other property. I think one of the other neighbors has seen mink on their properties. So it's an active area. It's a incredible resource for the town, for the people that live alongside it. And I'm concerned that it be observed properly. And then personally, this structure is directly across the street from me. Now I can see some of the sunsets. My sunsets are gonna go because there's probably gonna be a house there. But so I would say that I do have a concern just personally about things like ridge heights and how whatever the restrictions are on heights. I don't know what those regs are, but I'm particularly sensitive to that because my sun will be setting earlier. So those are some of my concerns. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Chris?
My name is Pieter Enkema van Dijk. I live on 19 Nicholson Lane.
I'm sorry, could you spell your name for the reporter here, please?
Okay. Pieter Enkema van Dijk.
You want to spell it letter by letter, please?
Kema space VAN space DIJK.
DIJK.
Yeah, and myself and my wife Yvette, we live on Nicholson Lane, so next to the property where the house is proposed. So I'm a hoarder and my wife wants to throw anything away, but luckily I saved this. So this is a picture because you guys talked about the trees and the seagrass. So this is a picture of how it used to be when it was one lot. Now, you see the seagrass in front, so it was on the front and on all the sides.
Excuse me, sir, when you're finished, would it be possible for you to submit that to Rick for the record?
Yeah, yes. And I also have, there's a little bit history and some things I think need to be corrected. We bought the house in '92, and at that time the Hughes lived next door on this house. You can still see the house in through the trees. It was indeed straddling both lots. And it's a beautiful property. It's long, but it's narrow. And at that time, then Mr. Hughes passed away. Then his wife had to move out. She became too old. A lot of people looked at the lot because it was close to 2 acres, but it was only 1.95 on an acre. So it couldn't be split. Mitch Ross bought it, tried to split it. It was denied by Planning and Zoning. It was denied by the Planning and Zoning Board of Appeals. Then he went to Connecticut court. It was at the time that the Stefanoni case was. I think what we heard later was that the town didn't really want to spend money on a lawyer to defend their decision. So anyway, the court decision was that it was allowed to be split. Since then it has been split. And we live a little bit with the consequences of that now, because it is a difficult property, because the split is long, the lengths, and you have two narrow properties on both sides. The Hughes house was 3/4 on 10 Nicholson Lane, 1/4 on 17 Nicholson Lane. So, but anyway, at the time, so we heard then after the fact suddenly that it was split. It was added to an agenda and approved. We never knew about that until after the decision. Then the house was proposed on 10 Nicholson Lane. I still have from Stearns and Wheeler the tree removal plan. So you see this dark, the dark trees are supposed to be removed. The rest was supposed to stay. Now, we took a picture from the front, but I don't have that here, but you guys went to the site, so you know more or less what it looks like. But there's a big difference from what it looked at the time, before the house was built on 10 Nicholson Lane, right? And this is the tree removal plan. All those other trees were removed as well. So we don't have a lot of confidence with this new house that is so big already, right? The few trees that are going to remain, yeah, nothing of the property is going to remain. It's going to be in our in our opinion, terrible. We realize now that that decision has been taken, that is a buildable lot, right? And that something will be built there. But this house is crazy big. And I also don't think the property is for sale for 4.6 million, right? I don't think the property is worth more with an approved house on it. And I think that's what's happened.
Thank you.
No, so I'll give this to you.
Is there another member of the public that would like to speak? Going once? Anybody else that would like to speak? Going twice? Okay. Given that there are a number of open issues, we're going to keep the public hearing open. Rick?
Continue.
We'll continue it. Okay, we'll continue it till the next meeting, or that's agreed to. One minor thing I'd like to clarify for Atlantic. In March 7 correspondence with Rick, there's a number of photos that are of the lot that are identified as 10 Nickerson Lane. This should be 17.
Sure, we can correct.
It's
not a problem.
I'm sure it isn't. I just want to get the record.
Get the housekeeping in order.
Yeah, get a little housekeeping, that's all. And so we'll be keeping this open for the next meeting, and we'll continue this. Okay?
Mr. Chairman,
Yes, sir.
if you would allow me, I would just like, we're not going to address any of the comments by item. We'll respond in writing before next hearing. One thing I did want to address on the record while we're all here tonight is just to the gentleman who just spoke. The characterization of our client that maybe was unintentionally implied, but I just want to make sure clear for the record that we would say that we're preserving trees and then not do that, I don't think is a fair characterization of my client, nor is it a very prudent thing to say about an applicant, nor is it something that, as you know, the commission would act on. So that's all I wanted to do, is clarify that for the record. We intend that whatever we have approved on that plan, to build that to the letter of the approval.
Okay.
I was talking about 10 Nickerson Lane. What happened there?
All right. Let's do this. What happened, 10 Nickerson Lane is not on the application. Okay, it's 17 Nickerson. So we'll keep the conversation to 17. And I think Matt has a number of issues that you'll be looking at, I'm sure.
Absolutely.
And that I look forward to your responses.
We'll see everyone next month.
Okay, great.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Okay. Moving on to new business. EPC 10, 1023, 24 Pasture Lane, E. Brovig and Y. Brovig. Let's take a second as people clear out. Thank you, man. Okay.
Yeah. Sorry, can I get your name again?
Eric Brovig, I'm the homeowner at 24
Eric
Pasture Lane.
Brovig.
Correct.
Eric Brovig.
4 Pasture.
Hey, Bill, can you do me a favor?
Brovach.
Just go outside and tell people to
Be like boy,
move along,
R-O,
'cause
B like Victor, I.
their
G
noise
like
is getting
George.
into here.
And Eric's with a K, E-R-I-K.
Excuse me? The name's
Oh, thank you so much.
Could I make a copy of
Do you want to take a picture of it?
10/20/23.
That's what I do
Yeah.
when I take it when I want it. That's what I do when I want it. Sorry. Right.
Oh,
We're on the first,
Where is it?
we're right here.
Oh, okay.
Front
Oh,
page.
thank you.
Yeah. So you're done, right? You don't have to stay for a while, I think. It's up to the individuals. That's critical. That's
You just have to stay for the whole meeting, even.
Pardon?
Let's get,
Hey, Rick, do you need her for the whole meeting? Or should she stay for the whole meeting, or since we finished with this public hearing?
We probably should at least through Scalise,
Right, through Scalise?
yes.
Okay, so we'll
Just
be
for a few
going,
more minutes.
we'll be going through
Let me put this
EPC
down.
320.
Let me put
We're
this
going through the first time we'll lead you to the first time on the second page,
Okay.
through that. Okay. I'll repeat this, EPC 10, 2023, 24 Pasture Lane, E. Brovig and Y. Brovig to implement a native landscape plan in and approximate to known wetlands resources and restore lawn grass to adjoining upland review area. The parcel lies along the north side of Pasture Lane, approximately 1,756 feet east of Nearwater Lane. It is identified as map number 51, lot number 53. The zone is R1, and it is approximately 1.08 acres.
Mr. Chairman, the reason why we're at least initially here this evening is to acknowledge receipt of the application, start the statutory at the time clock, allow for staff and commission members to review the application. But this has been a process for the last year and a half in which Mr. Brovig has been working with staff and has provided, and we have requested and secured staff approval for removal of several hazardous trees in the back of his property as determined by an arborist, and they provided pictures and the whole bit. And in addition is the opportunity here to improve the small pocket of wetlands here and make it both a positive feature from the perspective of the aesthetics, but also from a conservation point of view. So initially here is a application to do those improvements, restore some of the lawn, and do native planting in and immediately adjacent to the wetland. So in the next several weeks, staff will review the application. If there's anything that's missing, certainly, if anybody has any questions, issues, or concerns, we can incorporate it, and we'll move forward. It may be, and depending on if, what the commission thinks, it may be an opportunity, if you think so, to do it as an agent approval, but I'll leave that to you.
Anybody have, any commission member would like to talk?
I just have one question. So you've already approved the.
Some of the tree removal.
Right,
yes.
right. Don't we, when it's in a upland review area, don't we generally require that the stumps remain?
They usually are flush cut,
Mm-hmm.
so I haven't seen them I don't think they've been excavated.
Okay.
I mean, it's the limit, it's the disturbance that, so I think they were flush cut.
Mm-hmm.
I think there was an opportunity, or not an opportunity, but I think they will be proposing or have proposed to do some grinding of the
Right.
stumps. But,
So is grinding different
I
than
mean, it
removing?
really is, it's less, I think it's less destructive than the actual excavation, taking a root ball out.
Okay. Do we know how many stumps there are?
Can we ask the applicant, because maybe he knows?
I'm going to count, so there are 3, I don't know if you have a picture of the wetlands planting. We worked with Sarah on the McNicool, and I believe there are, from memory, I think there are 3 stumps immediately in the front, and then there's a pocket of 4 or 5 small ones along a stone wall.
So how big are these trees?
There was 1 large one, and the rest of them were, I'd say, 2 or 3 medium size, and the remainder fairly small.
So like, how many inches in diameter would you, if you had to guess?
This would be maybe the small size.
Okay.
There was 1 large one. The tree was probably, I forget what kind of tree, it was probably 50, 60 feet high, so it was quite large. That was the one that was decaying at the base and was dangerous. And then maybe two other ones of medium size, so I'm guessing something like this. Yeah, it's a rough guess.
So you want to grind them down to the ground, but not take all the root system out?
Correct.
Just
Correct.
Okay, so it's just basically you want to kind of, because you're putting in lawn, restoring lawn, you want that out of there.
Correct.
Okay.
Anybody else?
Yeah, I'll make a quick comment, Mr. Chairman. I was out there today. Everything I've seen on this project looks like just a dramatic improvement for the family's enjoyment of their rear yard. They're restoring wetlands in a very handsome way. I also spent some time, not related to this application, but being very careful to reread and look over our inland and wetlands regulations that are on the town site. Anybody can see them. There is no mention in there about stump removal or anything. So just to counter what Carolyn just asked, I think it's perfectly fine to remove stumps. The project is approved.
I think that stump removal and that level of excavation and soil disturbance has potential to become a big thing. That's why that we do at the staff level is when an arborist approaches us and truly says there's a tree that's hazardous, we just have them flush cut it. If they start removing, it's a big excavation and a big root mass. And
If they get a backhoe in there and
In partnership,
start to
in
yank it out,
partnership
then
with the restoration of a wetland that's being proposed.
Right, so what he's doing is saying, we're just gonna,
flush cut, that's it.
we're gonna flush cut and grind them. And they take them down a few inches underneath the soil surface, bring in some soil. They're gonna remove the chips, because the chips are bad. But remove the chips and then bring in some de minimis amount of topsoil to restore his lawn. And it's not up to the wetland, they're stepping it back from the edge of this pocket, very isolated wetland.
So I would applaud the applicant for the seriousness and the good work that he's put on the plan, for one. And I would personally think, given the limited nature of the impact here and also the seriousness of the application and the applicant's demeanor on this, is to suggest this be an agent approval.
Yeah.
I agree.
Yeah.
So I'll pursue an agent approval, it's not approved, but I'll do a review in the next few weeks.
I don't know if you understand the implication of that, and if not, maybe, Rick, you might want to just explain it to him.
No.
Or, let's put it this way, it's a lot more expeditious. Okay? So you won't have to come in front of the board again, so
That's it.
the commission again for approval. You deal directly with Rick, and there's a lot more give and take on that as opposed to a formal review here. So that's
And
the
commission
advantage.
only endorses the agent approval, so
So-
they do. That was a formal vote.
But I agree that this is this looks like an agent review. Okay, moving on, EPC 11, 2023, 23 Greenleaf Avenue, D. Pasley and A. Pasley to construct a single-family dwelling, drive, utilities, drainage, pool, and other related features proximate to the wetlands and water courses. The parcel lies along the north side of Greenleaf Avenue, approximately 670 feet west of Hollow Tree Ridge Road, and is identified as map number 23, lot number 7. The zone is R1, and this is approximately 4.14 acres.
Like the prior application, this is the first time that the commission has seen the application. It is an existing single-family dwelling on the property. The applicant intends to remove the existing house and construct a new single-family dwelling and an amenity package associated, and encroaching within the regulatory buffer. And there's generated plans for that, for stormwater, detention, water quality purposes, water quality elements, erosion controls, and a first shot at mitigation landscaping. So tonight is to start the process and to start the time clock. And if the board chooses to have a public hearing or not, we should make that determination this evening and set it up at a future.
Is this going to go in front of P&Z?
I'm
Yes.
assuming that it does.
I see the nodding head.
Yeah,
Okay, so
for
it will-
grading within 5 feet of the property lines.
Planning and zoning.
Okay.
And it's a flag lot, so we have special setbacks. We don't get your side setbacks. We have front and rear setbacks for the sides as well.
Okay. So I guess the question is, they're going to go through a public hearing in planning and zoning. So given that, do we need a public hearing? Does the commission feel that we need a public hearing for this particular application? I don't.
I don't
don't.
believe you do.
All right, so the sense of the commission is,
Yeah, I think normally we would want a public hearing, but because there is going to be a public hearing within the planning and zoning, I agree that we do not.
okay. So I think it'll be fine. You'll get a letter from Rick as to some of the concerns that you'll have to address by next meeting, hopefully. And then
We
we'll-
did already. He's
Okay.
very prudent about this stuff.
Okay, we're just accepting the application
I
tonight.
did.
Pardon?
I will be doing it in the next week or so.
Yeah, I thought so.
Mhm.
Okay, so we're just accepting the application tonight and for formal acceptance. Okay,
Do you want any comments from us on this?
sure. Go ahead.
I don't have any negative ones. Actually, I like the layout where you've got a demarcation with rocks, and you've got I think it's 10 to 14 foot buffer zone. Am I looking at this thing right?
Yep.
Between that water course. So I'm impressed with that. It's a huge piece of property. It's like 4 acres back there. So the new house is going to be plenty of room all around, but that's not our category. But anyway, that's what I saw when I walked out. I don't know if anybody else had that same thought.
Yep, that's why we're not going to go to public hearing, because I think most of us are on that.
But I just want to applaud you on what you've been doing.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
I have only one question, if I may, Mr. Chairman. Help me understand, what is the right-of-way?
A right-of-way is granted to this property from other property owners that they have the right to pass through. So basically, I guess when the subdivision was done, they have a driveway off of Greenleaf. By the way, I'm Brian Muller from Muller Engineering, licensed professional engineer in the state of Connecticut.
Thank you, Mr. Muller.
They had, their main access is off Greenleaf, that's their address, and then they had a secondary access that's very old from the subdivision that's been maintained, primarily I think because some of this wetland, one of the pockets is probably man-made. There were old pipes in there from the house, and like this driveway that comes through there is a very nice access that leads directly to the schools where the buses pick up. So I think that was granted from there's like 1 or 2 other property owners that right-of-way is granted by, and they all share it as like a common driveway kind of thing, because there's 2 back lots. There's this lot, and then there's the other track next door. And our lot is actually currently still on septic, which I think is an improvement. We're gonna tie into sewer. The Greenleaf already has sewer in it, so that's what a right-of-way typically is.
Thank you for your help on that.
Okay, great. Anybody else would like a question or comment?
Go ahead.
Oh, sorry. So, yeah, I don't know if Rick mentioned that there's a wetland identified in the planting plan, but no kind of plantings in that area, but they appear to be on the other area, so I think there's probably opportunity for more robust plan there. And then I was a little confused on the map because there are these like kind of flower-like symbols, but they're not identified in any kind of key. And I didn't know if those were like trees to be taken out or if they represented something else. I guess, I don't know if anybody else had the same confusion as I did.
Flower-like symbols.
They're just the circles, like all the circles that appear all over the map.
Oh, so
What are those?
Alexandra Mark for the record, I did the planting plan.
Excuse me, could you please come up here so everybody can hear you?
Am I crazy by asking this? Am I stupid? Is this a stupid question?
There's never.
Alexandra Mark, a wetland soil scientist, landscape designer for the record. So the area in green, it's basically a meadow. And then you have smaller circles, which are 5 in diameter. And they're all shrubs, which are identified below. And each circle has a sign abbreviation. And then we have larger ones, which are trees.
So the gray ones, like, are some
These
of
are
these
the
X'd out?
existing. These are the existing trees.
Okay, and
the,
they're staying
the black
or they're
ones.
being
Yes.
removed?
Yeah.
They're staying. They're
Okay,
existing
are any
and
trees being
staying.
removed?
Yes, there are some, but they're not in the buffer. but there are some trees to be
oh, I
removed for the
see.
development, yeah.
Okay, so none in this area.
Yeah, on my plan, I have, you'll see on the erosion control sheet, I think, or it might be on the site plan sheet as well. The only trees in the immediate development area are being removed in and around the house, but we're trying to keep a wooded area along the upper left and along the rear for screening purposes. There's a lot of nice native oaks that are very large in diameter, if you've been out there. And the homeowners really want to try to keep some of those nice trees, particularly for shade. And if you've been out there, there's plenty of room for sunlight, so. And they will be doing plantings. They want to do plants. They want to like revive the area. If you've been out there, like their house is rented right now while we're doing this planning portion of it. But they've had so many issues. They had a water line break and leaking. So I mean, it's
And then I just had one more quick thing,
Yeah.
which I pretty much say to everybody, but on the O&M plan, the operations and maintenance plan, words like we recommend you do this on a periodic basis, if we could just get a little more solid language in there and,
Yeah.
things that we can hold people accountable to, that would be
That's
great.
not a problem.
Thank you.
I just have one quick question. So getting back to the access way that leads out to, I think it's Hollow Tree Ridge Road. It looks like it's suggested from the plans that so the resident, you'll be able to access either way, correct?
Mhm.
But that's not the way it's historically been? It was more of you said it was kind of it was like a walking path kind of thing?
No, it was definitely a travel path for vehicles, I think, to move through these back properties.
Okay.
The old house, I'll bring in a big blow-up of the existing condition survey, and I think the old house lends as to why it came in that way, because the garages face that access way.
Right.
And we dug test holes out there, and it seems like that road has been there for a long time. There's a lot of different layers of gravel there that have been piled up over years to fill in different potholes and things. And our plan is to try to limit changing that really in any way. We kind of want to leave it the way it is and not disturb it. It's been there for so long, there's no reason to really disturb it. I think the clients want to try to keep it gravel and have the other portion that goes out to Greenleaf as the asphalt, where they're like, UPS would come in and things like that. This would be access for them to take their kids to and from the parks or the schools or town or things like recreational things like that.
So as the home is being constructed, how will the property be accessed by the construction vehicles?
I'm going to have to discuss that with the owner, but that is up for discussion for sure.
Okay.
Yeah.
Great, thank you so much.
I actually was on that road. I had friends that lived in the Jennings house back in the 60s, so we walked that road a lot.
Yeah.
So it was well established there. I don't know how far it went back.
Yeah, I will say about the access and construction, I would love to be able to just say we can come from Greenleaf, but I came out here to dig test holes myself, and I just drive a pickup truck, and I towed a trailer, and it was kind of tight to get into. Even though this is a wide driveway for these two properties, it was tight to pull in there because Greenleaf is a private road, and it has like the white picket fences out. So, and those are important. I have young kids, so those are important. I live on a busy road, and my kids can't go play in the street, so I do enjoy that. And to like move those out of the way, the contractors never put them back, or they hit them and then they're destroyed, and then it causes adverse impact on the association. And I don't want my client to be hated before he even moves in.
Right, understood. Thank you so much.
No, thank you.
Okay.
Thank you, sir.
Okay, moving on. EPC 12-2023, 300 Mansfield Avenue, Country Club of Darien, Inc., to replace an existing pump house and irrigation system in and approximate to wetlands, watercourses, and special flood hazard areas. The property lies along the east side of Mansfield Avenue, approximately 1,750 feet north of Buttonwood Lane, and is identified as map 5, lot 40. The zone is R2, and it is approximately 139.051 acres. Rick?
Mr. Chairman, again, initial submission seeking to start the statutory time clock. Proposal is to, a project to modify, enhance the existing irrigation system out at Country Club of Darien. That includes some work on the existing pump house affecting in and proximate to wetlands, water courses, and special flood hazard areas. It will necessitate that we do a pretty extensive look. It's a large property, a large project, and the focus of the regulated work is associated with this pump house. So this evening, starting the statutory time clock, and in the coming weeks come up with a list of the information that's necessary to ensure the absence of impact on the regulated areas, but also that the pump and all the other features there are going to be flood-proof, meeting the FEMA and building code requirements for flood-proofing.
Does anybody have any questions or comments?
It's a big project, but I'm always curious, because it's a fertilizer use and keeping all of the greens green, is there any concern about trying to have some kind of buffer so as that sheet runoff doesn't go back into your ponds, which I know you pump it back out again, but also some of it moves on downstream. You got a lot of property, so I don't know how, maybe this is out of control to try to think about this, but is that something you guys are talking about?
My name is Patrick Schur. I'm a licensed professional engineer with the state of Connecticut, and I'd actually, J.R. Lappin, who's the superintendent with the property, may be able to offer some more insight into their fertilizer plans.
J.R., you want to come up?
J.R. Lappin, superintendent at Country Club of Darien. We have, with this project, we haven't really focused on fertilizer setbacks, but we're actually a part of Audubon Society. So with that, we have regulated setbacks throughout our property with all water intercourses, and we kind of depends on product labels, what that distance is, whether it's 10 feet from a water course or 25 feet from a water course. Every label is kind of different, so we kind of just follow
That's
those.
spraying, right?
Yeah, spraying.
So you don't really have, if it starts raining, that sheet water could carry that back into the...
Correct. So each area has a defined setback of what we leave for a buffer after an application.
But no way to filter before it goes into that.
That would be the filtering, is the grass buffer or whatever else is there.
Oh, you do have a grass buffer growing?
Yeah, so we do have grass. We have buffers around all of our ponds with heavy vegetation.
Got it.
So that's kind of what catches any fertilizer or pesticide if it was to run off.
If you recall, one of the things that they are doing that we've looked at the staff and even the chair had looked at some of the positive things they're doing.
Oh, yeah, they're doing good stuff. I'm just curious.
Is, moving their active use kind of activities away from the wetlands and water courses, using native grasses along the edge of the Goodwise River as it passes through, installing plantings, arborist review of trees and taking out ones that are hazardous or that are non-native. So they are doing things on the property that doesn't involve just spraying. They're doing things with managing the space.
That is great.
It's
you got one of the biggest open spots in Darien right there.
It is large.
So the two of you are doing your
Well, I remember having the conversation with Tim Allen, who I believe was your predecessor.
Yep.
And these guys are professionals on how they, they're not you and me throwing nitrogen on, Scott's, whatever it is, on the lawn.
Glad to hear that.
And saying like that, because for them, that's a lot of money. Okay, fertilizer has to be a big chunk of your bill, and so they've got to be very judicious about that. And they also have, I don't know how many members there are in CCD, but lots of what I call sidewalk supervisors. That I'm sure you have to listen to and listen all the time. But so anyway,
That's all I got.
having lived near Darien Country Club, I grew up near Darien Country Club. So I remember that, and I think it's really progressed a long ways from where I remember.
I appreciate that.
So,
I feel like the club's moving in the right direction as far as native grasses that don't get mowed or require any inputs. especially along the Goodwise River. I think it's going to be beneficial in the long term. So, thank you.
Thank you.
I have a question for
Oh, sorry. JR.
Sorry, I had a question for
Yep.
you. On the, we're asking questions on this, right?
Sure.
That's okay? Okay.
Sure. You've got the man here. Okay.
So, since you're in the environmentally conscious spirit and mindset there at Darien Country Club, and I see the amount of water that's being used, 400 gallons per day, I guess, 400,000 gallons per day. And so with this new irrigation system, have you guys considered those like gray water systems, like those different types of sprinkler systems, or is it just straight fresh water? Is it something that?
No, so with the new irrigation system, so we're allowed to use 375,000 gallons a day. We're allowed to refill from our irrigation wells with 400,000 gallons a day. But after a summer like we just experienced, we don't even have enough water on property to come close to that number. So a big part of putting in this new irrigation system is, one, access to more water that we do have on property. And we're not allowed to put any other water into our irrigation ponds. So we're not allowed to put city water into it. We're just allowed to use the water we get from our bedrock wells and runoff that comes from upstream. I don't know if that answers your question.
Not sure. I don't think that. Well, so like golf courses. Like I used to work at a golf course where they installed an irrigation system that used the gray water that came, from the site. Is that something that you guys might consider?
It would be a consideration. I'm just not sure if it would be feasible, because I'm not sure where we would have to have different tie-ins. I don't think we produce enough on property to water a 140-acre plot. So we'd have to either figure out an alternative pumping station, which I'm not sure if it's possible, or another place to store it on property.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know.
I wouldn't want to mix the gray water because they have some pretty
Right.
deep ponds, ponds, if you will, that, and you sit there, so I wouldn't want to see that feeding
So did the one where I
into.
worked.
Pardon?
They had the same setup, right? Like we had ponds and things like that as well. So, and we did install a gray water system. So just, just a thought for something to look at.
Okay, it's something to look into.
It's realistic, and if it's not, it's not. But,
Okay, that's great. No, we have an irrigation consultant that I work with, so it's a question I can bring up to him.
That's an excellent.
It might save money in the long run too. I don't know.
And save water.
Never use the water.
Let's save water.
Yeah.
Anyway, thank you, JR.
Thank you.
Okay. Thank you.
It's also important to note that the new system is going to be much more efficient and targeted. So they're going to be able to more selectively water the areas that require it rather than turning on sprinklers for an entire hole and watering the rough with the fairway. So it will result in a much more efficient distribution of water across the site.
That's great to point out. Thank
Do you have unlimited capacity in those wells? I mean, you can pump all day long if there's water there. There's no restriction from the state saying you can only pull so much out of the.
So the
ground
water diversion permit limits them to 400,000 gallons per day.
From the ground or from the pond?
From the ground,
Okay.
and that is to replenish the pond
Okay.
itself.
So there is a restriction on how much you could pull out of the.
Yes, and
aquifers.
but as JR mentioned, it sounded they're not close to getting that type of capacity from the wells, especially after a summer like we just had.
And that permit's from DEEP?
Yes.
Thank you.
And it's currently active.
Learn something.
Okay, the next, thank you very much. Appreciate it. The next application is CPC 13-2023-14 Meadowbrook Road, M. Baraldi and L. Baraldi to construct residential additions, modify drive and parking areas, and conduct other related activities proximate to wetlands and watercourses. The property lies along the south side of Meadowbrook Road, approximately 820 feet east of Brookside Road, and is identified as map number 14, lot number 11. The zone is R1, and it is approximately 0.9148 acres.
Purpose of being on the agenda this evening is to acknowledge receipt, establish the start date for the review process for an application that is a residential addition within the upland review area on a residentially developed property. So I've already been to the site, and we'll be developing a list of information necessary to move forward with the application. Any comments, or determine if you need a public hearing on this, and then any comments you may have, I can certainly incorporate into the request for data if anybody has been there.
Okay, well, let's start. Does anybody have any questions?
First.
Please. I was going to, but Lauren, do you have any questions or comments?
No, I mean, I'm looking forward to seeing more information. I don't really have enough to make, too many questions, but I didn't see a planting plan. Is that something that we've gone back and asked?
That's one of the things that we end up doing.
Okay, yeah, I'll wait for more.
Great.
So, the project description and the sequence of construction, I was just a little confused because there's no mention of a pool house in the project description, but then there is in the sequence of construction. Is that just a mistake, a typo?
So, my name is Matt Doherty. I'm an architect representing the Baraldis on this application. So yes, the pool house is not part of this
Okay,
project.
so that's just a typo then?
It is.
Okay, that shouldn't be in there. Okay. Is there any anticipated tree loss with this project?
So there's, if you've been to the site, this entire back section of the property is all lawn at the moment. So it's lawn and a patio and another patio. So there's no tree removal proposed for this project.
Okay. And is there any existing stormwater management systems or any proposed?
So currently, all the rainwater is collected in gutters and then drains to the site. Because overall, our impervious surfaces that we have are going to be less. We're going to be reducing the size of the driveway a little bit. And the fact that all of our construction is going to be on top of existing impervious surfaces, we don't really meet the requirement to do a stormwater retainage system. So we would just be collecting in gutters and then discharging back onto, as it is now.
Okay, thanks.
Yep.
I was there today. It looks like a very straightforward project to me. I was glad to see the bridge repair from the storm of September of '21, right at your client's home, right adjacent to the home.
Yeah, so exactly, to
great.
connect to the back
amazing.
properties on Meadowbrook.
It was amazing, but
That was an amazing storm.
it all looks good to me.
Yeah.
Just a silly question. The letter of authorization for you is signed by Michael Brandy. Is that a mistake, or should that
So,
be like for all
that's been an autocorrect problem. Every time I type Baraldi, it's just one of those things.
All right, I got it. Thank you.
But Mr. Baraldi is right here, and he would attest that.
All right.
I could represent him.
I just got a couple small ones. There is, so the back of that lot, I'm trying to think, we got north, I guess it would be the, looking at this thing. So when you're looking straight from Meadowbrook Road and you're near the property of Wentz, W-E-N-S-E-K, but to the backside there, it's really wet back there. It's not located as wetlands, but it was, well, maybe it is part of that one, but it's super wet.
It's wetland.
When I walked that.
Yeah,
It's wetlands.
so just to point out exactly where the wetlands flags are, they start here and they go all the way around everything, like this. So
Yeah, so
our
looking down at,
upland review area, the limit of it is here. So essentially,
Right.
a large portion of the existing house is currently in the review area.
Right.
We have a small little section, which fortunately, the majority of our activities fall within, which is not regulated, but we
Right.
still have those fringes that.
When was this house built?
So the original house was built in the 30s, and then it was added on to in the 80s.
Makes sense.
so going back to that
This was a
point,
floodplain.
it's
Yes.
wet, really wet there now, and you're gonna draw more water off new construction going onto that wet area, which is, I don't know if you're gonna be getting your neighbors flooded over there. That's what I'm concerned about.
So
Because it's wet now,
there's-
you add more water to it, will it start
Yeah, so-
ending up over in that property?
One of the things that we're proposing is, if you look at the survey, it shows kind of the limit of the lawn areas.
Yep.
So even though, technically we're not adding new impervious surfaces, we're
Right.
kind of affecting some of the areas that haven't been disturbed with our rearranged parking area.
Yeah.
So what we're proposing is just to kind of square off some of these lawn areas, so that way we can try
Yeah.
to introduce maybe a little bit more buffer.
I think that's good there.
We talked about, I spoke with Rick about kind of developing some additional
Right.
plantings, which we've started conversations with some landscape designers, and we're trying to get those actual planting materials in place.
So between those two spots, I'll go back to that other area again, but between those two spots, there is a dumping area? No, flip it over there. Yeah. So you got those two areas where you're gonna put some, so back in that corner between those two, there is a lot of dumping that's on the skunk cabbage and all the other stuff.
This corner
Yeah,
here.
yeah, you might wanna get rid of all the, it's natural material, but it's been thrown on top of a, wetland area. Like, you can see the skunk cabbage and everything's getting loaded up. So we'd rather not have that stuff dumped there or taken away, whatever. And then back to my other problem, to the left side, right there, yeah. So it's super wet there, and I'm just thinking, if you're adding more water to that, make sure that doesn't run off into your neighbor down below. That's all I'm asking on that one.
Okay.
And then one last one, I'm a pain in the ass, is that up on the top near the road, over to the left side, yeah, you got it, there's a nice long 20-foot piece of, it's a piece of material that's laying in the wetlands there too. Have you seen that piece? It's like 20 feet long, it's all white, and it's laying right in that area.
What?
Underneath
There's
the
some
tree.
debris that's there. It's
Under the
siding.
trees,
It's house
under the
siding.
trees.
That's it.
Underneath this area here?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's under the,
Okay.
as you just look there, you'll see it's beautifully white. It's like someone ditched it in there, and it's like 20 feet long. Yeah, you get rid of that in 2 seconds. That's all I got. Thanks.
Okay. Thanks, Don.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Okay, moving on. Old business, EPC 3-2023, 205 Middlesex Road, J. Scalisi. To construct a new family dwelling, drive, drainage, sanitary sewer, and other related features to a pond. Features proximate to a pond. The property lies along the north side of Middlesex Road, approximately 200 feet west of Norton Avenue, and is identified as map number 9, lot number 14. The zone is R1 half, and it is approximately 17,423 square feet. Okay, I believe all the members, the commission members have received a draft, and I know Jim has spent time.
I believe some edits, suggested edits.
Okay, so I believe they're included, but if they're not, they will be included. Has everybody had a chance to look through this? Do you have any questions or comments? No? No? Okay, can I have a motion?
Make a motion to approve the permit to conduct activities, EPC 032023, 205 Middlesex Road.
I second that motion, Mr. Chairman.
All in favor?
Aye.
Okay, thank you. That's it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Sorry.
Okay, the next item of business is EPC 4-2023, 3 Canoe Trail, J. Johnson and G. Johnson, to construct residential additions, install walls, implement grading, and conduct other related activities in special flood hazard areas, and proximate to wetlands and watercourses. The property lies along the south side of Canoe Trail, just west of Arrowhead Way, and is identified as map number 70, lot number 51. The zone is R1 and is approximately 43,782 square feet. Commission members have a draft of the approval. Jim has gone through and done his magic on this and he's sent these on to Rick for inclusion.
That's correct.
Does anybody else have any questions and comments on this? No? No? Okay.
Make a motion to approve permit to conduct regulated activities, EPC 04-2023 Canoe Trail.
I'm happy to second that motion, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. All in favor? Okay, the next item of business is 30.0 Woods Road, R. Levinson, to construct an in-ground pool, patios, drainage, and other related features within close proximity to wetlands and watercourses. The property lies along the south side of Point of Wood Roads, approximately 450 feet west of West Norwalk Road, and is identified as map number 12, lot number 20. The zone is R1, and it is approximately 2.036 acres. The commission members have received a draft of the approval. Jim has submitted a few typos and minor changes, which I don't believe were included in this, but will be when Rick does the final. Is there, you can't pull it, because it's, let Karen just do her thing, she knows how to do it. So, does anybody have any questions or comments?
I just have one thing. I brought this up the last meeting, and I didn't see any description of the fence, because it's not just around the pool, but like, I'll say this every time, because I always feel like these fences have to have, 3 inches below them, and there's no description of the fence that I could see.
Yeah, the fence was elevated for all possible.
Oh, okay.
Migration of lava.
My
I remember this.
apologies. Okay, yeah, okay, sorry.
Okay. Anybody else have any questions or comments? No?
Make a motion to approve permit to conduct regulated activities, EPC 072023 30.0 Woods Road.
And I'll second that motion.
All in favor? Okay, approved. Okay, the next one is EPC 859 Brookside Drive, P. Sergeant and A. Sergeant, to demolish existing accessory structures, construct a residential addition, grade and landscape approximate to wetlands, watercourses, and special flood hazard areas. The property lies along the east side of Brookside Drive, approximately 975 feet north of Anthony Lane, and is identified as map number 47, lot number 5. The zone is R1/5, and it is approximately 9,797 square feet.
Mr. Chairman, if you recall at last month's meeting, the commission had some preliminary comments, and staff had some preliminary comments pertaining to this application. It's essentially, it's a residential addition on the back of the existing single-family dwelling that occupies the site. There's some number of accessory structures, a garage, sheds, and other related facilities on the property. There are no wetlands on the property, but the buffer from wetlands and watercourses on the property to the north extends up onto this site. On the front of the property, the floodplain extends up into the site, as does the 100-foot regulatory setback to the river. In and of itself, the residential additions do not encroach within regulated areas, but all the other work, the attendant facilities, the regrading, the restoration of space that is currently gravel parking area, some of the regraded and disturbed portions of the site, some of the demolitions. And that therefore triggers the need for this EPC permit. In response, the applicant has provided the site development plan that shows the full extent of the encroachments to address the issues raised by the commission relating to encroachment, drainage, and water quality and opportunities to enhance the conservation values of the site or stabilize the soil through planting. The applicant reports that about 1,600 square feet of the upland review area was going to be affected by the project. The area is affected don't support lawn, gravel parking, or other developed space. The proposed grade change is low, with cuts and fills not expected to exceed 1 to 2 feet. There's extensive setbacks that are being maintained to the wetlands and watercourses in the river. No less than 75 feet to wetlands and watercourses, 95 feet to the watercourse, 75 feet to wetlands. The other things such as, and that's with the primary structures, other things with grading are somewhat less, but still rather significant off-site. The property to off-site to the north is owned by the state of Connecticut. It has some pretty extensive site disturbance on it. And there, with permission, there will be some reseeding of that space to stabilize it as well. No significantly sized vegetation is going to be lost. It may be, and in fact, it may not be any vegetation, but it could be some de minimis kind of ornamental planting. In terms of drainage impact, they're going to be removing impervious surface, and there was a determination from the engineer that if there was a decrease in overall site imperviousness with no adverse impact on drainage and adjoining properties. They submitted the plans to the town's consulting engineer, who has come back and said they recognize the absence of impact and asked for some de minimis changes to the grading plan to ensure there was no standing water. Those have been implemented, and we just await the consulting engineer's final endorsement of that plan. There's a sediment and erosion control plan with typical components that's been proposed to address water quality. And there has been a planting plan that's going to define the property boundaries to help stabilize the disturbed slopes and provide some screening from the residential to the more commercial space on the highway that's off to the north. In addition, to prevent future encroachments, the applicant has provided for a demarcation feature, and again, with proper permissions, hopes to at least seed some of the disturbed space north of the site to provide a stabilization for that and protection of the watercourse. Any impacts into the regulations are minimal and acceptable, and I know that Alexandra's here to represent the application. If she has questions, I'm available to answer questions as well.
I'm impressed that you got all this done over there. Was this something that, we didn't force them to do this, we were just like, if you wanted, but I remember one of you brought up little plantings would be helpful. So did they suggest this?
Well, let her show her.
No.
She spent time doing the diagram. No, Alexander, you have to come up here, please.
Show you how this is going to be.
Because I never expected we'd see anything this large, and that you're gonna go into DOT area and spruce that up. It's a beautiful thing.
Alexandra Mark, for the record, wetland soil scientist. So actually this area, so we use the McDonald's and the truck stop and people who work at the McDonald's and the truck stop, actually walking here through this wetland, and when they're coming back, they have tendency to drop their trash. So the new neighbors are being very good stewards of this land, and they're willing to make those improvements.
I'm really impressed. I also like it because that is there's a culvert underneath that road, as you know, that goes right in the River and Holly Pond, my favorite thing, right? So this is kind of a special item. I appreciate it.
No, we're.
Yeah.
So when one edge of the pond is being impacted by a huge project, there's the little tributary which are going to be enhanced.
Yeah, a nice little, very impressive. Thank you.
Anybody else have anything that they would like to?
What do you have to do to get approval for the installing the wet mix and the, did you say it's DOT property?
Yes.
Okay.
Well, we're going
Just
to
ask them?
we're going to contact them. Yeah, I'm sure that they're going to be okay. This is not nothing harmful or structural. It's just stabilizing the disturbed area.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think
They probably
it's-
don't even know it.
Yeah.
Right.
You're right.
They probably haven't even visited that since the surveyor did the property way back when.
I mean, it's, right now, there's just nothing there to hold the runoff. I mean, there's no grass,
Right.
there's,
There's
you know,
nothing, yeah.
there's nothing, so, I mean, this is a huge.
No, we like this project.
Yeah, very
So-
nice, thank
Did
you.
you walk up back and see the totally ripped apart carcass of a deer from the coyotes? Right back in there. That place is loaded with
The depression?
right in the back corner, back in there.
Oh, I took a lot of pictures.
What is
I'll have
those
to-
bloody
I'll have
horns?
to
Like,
enlarge my
holy
pictures.
smokes.
Wow.
Well, now you can get a head for your.
There's some serious coyote action in there.
Wow.
Anyway, nice job.
Yeah,
Very
no, it's nice.
Thank you, Alexander. Very good. Okay, so, Rick, you'll write this up then, or?
That's on resolution.
Yeah, you'll write, okay. Okay, the next item of business is the approval of the minutes. Everybody should have a copy of the minutes. And you've gone, Jim's gone through it for typos, thank you very much. Is there any questions or comments from the staff members? No? No, then can I?
Yep, make a motion to approve the minutes of the regular meeting of February 1st, 2023.
Okay, second?
I'm happy to second that motion.
All in favor? Aye, okay. We have one agent approval, EPC 9/2023, 300 Mansfield Avenue, Country Club Darien, Inc., getting active, to install 8-foot fence, white vinyl privacy fence proximate to the wetlands and watercourses. The property lies along the east side of Mansfield Avenue, approximately 1,750 feet north of Buttonwood, and is identified as map number 5, lot number 40. The zone is R2, 139.051 acres. The 175-foot-long length of fence shall be installed along the eastern property boundary between the organic storage area and the single-family residence situated at 267. I'll point out for the record that the owner of 267 Brookside was contacted and is in total agreement with putting up the fence. As a matter of fact, requested it. So, we talked about this last. Does anybody ever have any more questions or comments? So that's done for an agent approval.
Yeah, we did the agent approval and the fence, they're gonna work around the trees and they're gonna bump it up so that it flows, and they put all the appropriate notes about the construction of the fence and removing any accumulated materials and stabilizing the soil, so it's an appropriate use as an agent approval or application as an agent approval and standard conditions.
All right, I've got one more thing, that I'll be very quick on, because it is getting late. We, the Environmental Protection Commission, have regulations for the town of Darien that we follow. They're available on the website, and hopefully all of you are familiar with them. Jim Millard, I guess he found some free time, and went through it, and came up with a whole bunch of typos that eventually, I'll keep this, just pass it down, that we would like to fix, okay? There's absolutely.
You're the man.
Good work, Jim. Good work. Wow,
You know,
you
it
wrote
was a
up
good
the
exercise.
typos.
I've read them before, but I read them with a greater focus.
You're gonna be so sharp at 90, you know?
I hope so.
But just to continue here, no, thank you very much, Jim, for doing this, because this is a lot of effort, and it, but this is step one, okay? Step one is for us to review it and say, yeah, we agree, okay? And step two is, I understand from Rick, that he and Jeremy have some, what I'll call material changes that they would like to make to this. So that'll be a step two that Rick and Jeremy would propose to do. And so we'll take a look at those and, see what we feel. I mean, we've advanced as a commission and so and we have a lot more experience by the inches of paper that we receive. So we understand, and there may be changes that they believe need to be in conformance with the state legislature.
Great.
Okay, with state code. So we will get those at some point in the future. At that point, we'll look at those, and we'll have every commission member will have a chance to question, comment, etc. And then Rick and I are trying to figure out if we need a public hearing on this because we'd have to publish that in the newspaper.
Any change has to go to a public hearing.
So we'll have a public hearing on that to discuss those changes, and then with that public hearing, we vote on it, et cetera, et cetera. Now, who gets the final approval on this? Because it just can't be us, right?
I think we approve it, and then I'd have to go back and look and see if a town body has to approve it as well. But I think
Maybe the
I have to,
It'll be interesting because I'm sure the Board of Selectmen will want to see it as an administrative matter, and I'd be surprised if the RTM didn't have to approve it because it's a town reg.
yeah, I have to see
Oh,
that.
TGSMA on the RTM maybe.
Well,
I don't know. Yeah.
maybe we have our coordinator with the
Oh.
RTM.
Yeah, bingo.
Some of the things-
Shouldn't happen to us.
Some of the things though to think about is the commission interested in, as we had in Stanford, every application had a notice requirement to abutting property owners. Would you be interested in adding that back? Sometimes I see here that, people don't find out about an application until the bulldozer pulls up next door.
Right, right.
Yeah.
So, that's something to consider, and it's, in the name of transparency and being a good citizen to those who are next to potential development. That may be something that you consider, and you keep it kind of the same way, 100 feet.
I don't think that's an undue burden.
Well, wouldn't that be one of in your step 2?
Yes, that would,
Yes.
that's what I'm saying, we
The
would write that
suggestion that
into
would
it.
come from Jeremy, from Rick, and whoever else,
Yeah.
to modernize
Yeah.
the regulations. This is more
These are-
clerical and
yes.
various clarifications that I found. And as I read it more closely, it was clear to me that, there's a little modernizing that could take place
Yeah.
inside these regs.
And then there's other things that you have to be consistent, as Eric said, with the state statute, any kind of changes to the state statute that have occurred since 2016. I don't think there was a ton of them. There may be a couple of them that will have to do with the extensions that were granted for COVID and other matters, the effective period of permits. The other thing that I find from an implementation standpoint is that ultimately, I think we should come up with some guidance as to what we regulate. Like it says 100 feet of the 5 Mile River. It's very difficult to establish where it formally becomes the 5 Mile River. And I see some inconsistencies in the application of permitting requirements historically. Sometimes down south of Tokenique Road, you see EPC permit applications. Sometimes you don't. Is it really the 5 Mile River, or as on many maps, it's Long Island Sound? So I'll probably be looking to you for some guidance, just so it's consistent application of the regulations.
Townwide.
Yeah, and so things like that we have to kind of sit there and filter through. This is great. This is a great starting point. Consistency is the state regulations a must, and then there's other things that we've put in as long as they're consistent with the state statute that.
I think it's great you're looking into giving us more scope out there, that I think we're ready for it, right? So
Well, it's
looking and comparing what you did in Stanford and would it work here? I think
Also,
it's
it
great.
could be, less activity, but more ingrained in what the regulated state statutes require this
Well, that's
commission to do.
important too, right.
Now, where do you draw the line? I just want to be
Okay.
consistent,
Yeah.
from day to day, There's things like, again, Norwood River is like, not Norwood, I'm sorry, like 5 Mile River is always kind of troubling to me.
Going-
Do you draw the Tokenique Road where it's a formal water course, or where it goes under Tokenique and it kind of expands and it's really an estuarine embayment and subject to tidal influence, and that still is regulated under CAM, but that's
So
something
for
that we
example,
have to talk
Scotts
about.
Cove is not.
Right.
We don't touch Scotts Cove because it's part of Long Island Sound, it's called Scotts Cove. But we don't regulate that. But we have, for example, one of the first cases I ever had was 123 5 Mile River, which is down by the circle, down there.
Right.
And that's very clearly, what's the difference between that and Scotts Cove? Okay, so it says in our regulations that, for example, we control Holly Pond. Okay. There's an argument out there that says maybe we should, maybe we shouldn't. Okay, and so, but our regulations state it, so we implement it and we go with it. But it's, there's a conversation I think we as a commission should have, is to say, as I say, for example, we're looking at the fishing licenses. You have a saltwater fishing license.
Right.
The delineation is the first road that crosses that stream. So for example, the Post Road is the first road that crosses Holly Pond.
Right.
So anything seaside of that,
Need a
you would need a saltwater fishing license, as opposed to a freshwater fishing license. So there's some interesting there's some interesting conversations we should have with that, just to go through this.
Something that Rick said, or if I can point that out, the regulations you'll see if you go online and look at them on the town's website are dated 2016, 7 years ago.
Yeah.
State statutes change and may have a different influence on the way they were written back in 2016. So to me, it's an exercise of just taking a fresh look at the regulation, cleaning up just typos, but making adjustments to the regulation that may come from higher authorities at the state level that should be in our thinking.
So you have a list of a number of items that we can,
Just a few so far, but I think,
want me to give you some more? I tell you, my daughter's wired into Portsmouth, New Hampshire, man, and their EPC, it's got all kinds of good stuff in it.
Well,
I don't want to inundate you guys.
Why don't we get a copy of theirs?
All right.
Can you?
I'd love to.
The only thing is,
It's a big city.
It's New Hampshire, it's not Connecticut.
It's
but-
New Hampshire's not gonna give you.
So I don't want to inundate you with stuff, never mind.
Yeah, but ours has to be as strict as the state of Connecticut, and can be more strict,
No, you can't.
right? Oh, it
Yeah.
can't
more
be?
strict.
We can't be more strict than the state.
We can't?
No, you cannot,
I think
in
we
terms
can.
of what you can in
That's
terms
a
of
good
what
point
can
to
be
know.
regulated.
So it's like that's the ceiling, the state statutes, the state law.
Yeah,
So it has to, so then why wouldn't we just take theirs? I don't understand why it can't.
Our authority is delegated from the state, so we
Yeah.
can only take as much authority as they give us.
And we can't go beyond.
And we can't go beyond.
Are there gray areas?
And the state statute,
Sounds
state
like it.
statute.
Bill will find them.
No, I don't know. Well, like the
But why
last
don't we
year in
just-
2021 was the year that they clarified, and this is, for example, in Fairfield. Fairfield
Okay.
does not charge applicants in planning and zoning
Ah,
to hire experts.
okay.
So in other words, that's at the town's expense. So the
Right.
town has been reluctant in the past to hire experts like Canis and other people to have a counter opinion. But in 2021, they made it clear that towns are able to charge that back to the applicant.
So did we charge this one back to them tonight?
Yes.
I didn't know that.
It comes back,
Matt Pop?
interestingly enough, Bob Maslin, it's called Cornaccia versus the town of Darien. when you read environmental law in the state of Connecticut,
Yeah.
if that's not the first case they present, it's second or third.
I'll be done.
And
Thank
so,
you.
and so where
Clarifying
you,
that.
where, if there's one expert on a case, we must.
Yeah, counter it.
No, we can't counter it because, Bill, you're not an
No,
an
no, we have to
arborist
hire an
expert.
expert to counter it.
But we must accept his determination as accurate, okay? And that's why we go out and we ask the Matt Pops, the Joe Canises of the
And
world.
then they charge their fee back to the applicant.
Yes.
I did not know.
Absolutely.
Yeah, absolutely.
But Fairfield now had to.
They didn't do that.
I pointed it out to someone, and then they said, we don't do that, and they said, well, the law changed, so you now expressly can do it, now they gotta change their regs.
Back on that quick, and then we'll get out of it. The transparency on the neighbors knowing, I fell into that trap over in that Seagate thing. I would have loved to have known they were gonna do that house instead of us happenstancing finding out about it.
Yep.
If we had a neighbor who had known that they were gonna do something. And also, if you do that, maybe you don't need a public hearing because the two
that's-
neighbors on
right.
both sides have already like, hey,
And you know, you're only supposed to have, again, always fall back on the regulations. The thing with the public hearing, the regulations say, and the state statute says, you shall not have a public hearing unless you make a finding of it's in the public interest.
Right, right.
And it's always, or if it's significant impact,
Yeah, so-
or if you get a petition.
so it's an
Yeah,
exception.
but
only.
The thing is, though,
What defines public interest?
Yeah,
Well,
exactly.
and the other thing is,
Exactly.
That's the
There's
gray.
a lot of
the
wiggle
old-
room.
The big gray area.
Yeah.
that's why,
Oh.
so, you know, so in Stanford, and I think in Greenwich too, is that we had done notice within X number of feet of every single application.
Yeah, yeah.
And
Okay.
again, it might be something that you think about, you know.
Yeah, I think it's a good idea.
It often, you know, not often, but sometimes comes where you create problems for yourself. if
Yeah,
you're
you
getting
do.
negative. However,
Yeah.
from a fairness perspective,
It's transparent.
it's showing that, you know, you want people's input into what goes on, so.
I like
And you
it.
don't always want to have a formal public hearing, you know. Welcoming people's input.
I mean, this one obviously was
Yes.
more,
Yeah.
more,
And this
I
had
didn't realize it
history-
was gonna be that kind of
And it had history to it
opposition.
too.
No,
So it was
oh,
interesting.
yeah, I do, I knew.
You
that
must
was-
have known, but I didn't.
Yeah.
I didn't.
I had, you know, heard the tom-toms.
Yeah, all right.
That,
Well,
that, you know.
you're wired in anyway, so.
I know, but you're Mr. Holly Bond. you know.
I am Holly Pond, but I missed that one. All right. This is a good meeting, good meeting.
Anyway, thank you all.
Thank you,
It was
Mr.
a
Chairman.
long meeting.
Motion?
I know.
You got a motion to adjourn?
Oh, so.
I second that.
All in favor?
Bottom.
All right.
And then
Thank you very,
So
good night,
all
Channel
these are
79.
your-
Hey, Rick, thanks for
Yeah.